Do you ever sit up at night and wonder if you're playing God here?
You know, it's forecasted that we could lose up to 50% of all biodiversity between now and 2050. Not as many people talk about the species preservation side and the conservation aspects of kind of what we're trying to do. If you look at technology as humans' apex innovation, access to compute and AI, synthetic biology, and all of these tools, this kind of blows people's mind, but we could bring back extinct species, rewild them into the ecosystem. And here's what's crazy and what people don't realize. Red wolves is the most endangered wolf in the world. It's the only wolf that's only endemic to the United States. There's 15 left in the wild. 15, 1-5. And so that is the world that we live in. We now have the tools where we are going to move from scientific experiments to...
There's people that have already used these things in an unregulated way. There was a Chinese doctor that created a... He got in a lot of trouble for it.
Alleged trouble. Wait.
You guys made a direwolf. Like, what the hell's going on here? Hey guys, if you're not subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and hit that like button on the video. And if you don't have time to watch this episode right now, no problem, but I'd really appreciate it if you would save it to your watch later playlist. Finally, if you'd like to follow me on Instagram and X, those links are in my description below. Thank you.
I still like the setup. I think it's cool.
Thank you.
Like with the random tape measure.
Actually, there's a story behind that tape measure.
Oh, really?
So I went down to visit my buddy Paul Rosolie in the Amazon like a year ago. He's been down there for 19 years, conserving areas within like the Peruvian Amazon near the Brazilian border. He's got over 100,000 acres now that he has. He's awesome. Like the only American on the team. He co-founded it with guys who have literally lived in the jungle their whole lives. And it was really cool because I owe a lot of my, like the reason I'm here to him, because he gave me a shot. He had never been in a podcast studio before. He went to my parents' house.
Awesome.
Like 3 years ago. And then we did a nuclear podcast and the rest was history. And it worked out. But when I went down to visit him, one day he said to us, he said, "You want to take a quick boat ride upstream?" We're like, yeah, fuck it. Let's do it. He's like, "We can only go up there. We'll get out for 20 minutes. Then we got to come back before the sun's down." And so he takes us up to this spot and we walk up through the brush and suddenly it's just destruction. It's like you just see acres of the Amazon fucking gone. And we're all just like, there's probably 10 of us. We're all looking at this like, what the fuck? And he comes up behind us and he goes, "What you see here looks really bad, but this is actually a victory." And I'm like, "Malaka, what are you talking about? A victory? Everything's gone. Yeah. He's like, "Listen, this is like 10 acres or whatever. Behind there is all good." He said, "You see these spots where all these like wood sheds were set up with tape measures like that sitting on it?" He goes, "There's still fire burning around here. Congratulations, we just bought this off these guys." This is what going on podcasts and like raising money to actually get awareness on this lets us do. So he said the 50,000 acres back there, no one's going to touch that. And he said, "We'll use the balsa wood here to build a new research station."
That's awesome.
And so I brought back the tape measure there because I was like, damn, that really like kind of symbolically brings it home.
That's awesome.
But enough from me. You guys made a fucking direwolf. Like, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah, I mean, I think our team did. I don't know what Matt actually does, but
Nobody does.
Yeah, our team did. So we've spent. Most people don't know this, but Colossal's the world's first de-extinction and species preservation company. People get really stoked about the de-extinction side and want to talk about it, want to debate it, want to get excited about it, which I'm sure we'll go into. Not as many people talk about the species preservation side and the conservation aspects of kind of what we're trying to do.
Let's talk about that.
So your story, resonates with us because, it's forecasted that we could lose up to 50% of all biodiversity between now and 2050. And when we started the business, I went back and looked at our original deck. The forecast was 15%, 1-5. That's not the best fucking trend line.
When was that? When did you start?
2021. Whoa. Yeah. So it's kind of been crazy. And so George and I had this idea, and I really got to credit George. It was mostly George Churches. I don't know if you've ever had George. George would be a fun guy to have on the podcast.
Yeah, he's the co-founder.
Yeah,
right?
He's 6'7", head of genetics at Harvard, got narcolepsy, super weird and interesting. And ultimately, I had a little bit of...
Yeah, audio good?
Yeah.
It's just the headphones. We should be good, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And so George is the head of genetics at Harvard, He's like one of the kind of godfathers of synthetic biology. And I met with him, and his whole idea was we could bring back extinct species, rewild them into the ecosystem, help the ecosystem, and also build technologies for conservation, which he thought was pretty exciting. And I thought that was the wildest, craziest idea I had ever heard. And so I kind of challenged him on it in our second meeting. And his response was this. At the time, he was like, we could lose 15 to 20% of species between now and 2050. And then it just has gotten worse and worse and worse in terms of deforestation, overfishing, just eradicating species, and putting bounties on their heads, doing all these different things. So we thought we could do this like super flashy, different way of conservation, because all the tech we make on the path to de-extinction, we open source and give to the world for free for conservation. So
real quick, I just want to double check the audio, but I want to dig into this. Hold on one second. All right, we're back. So if the headphone keeps going out, we'll just take them off.
Yeah, that's
cool. But anyway, so I actually really do want to talk with you about the conservation side today, because I also know that's where like the controversy comes from. Because I think the first question would be, even before we get to dire wolves and why you started there, like the excitement of saying we're going to bring the woolly mammoth back.
Yeah.
Like that gets the people going.
It gets people excited.
I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
I think it's really cool. Then you look at the fact that the woolly mammoth has been gone for maybe it's like 14,000 years, something like that.
4,000
years.
Most people don't know this, but they were like, this kind of blows people's mind. But we as humanity, not Colossal, we don't have like super anti-aging drugs yet.
We could take credit for it.
Yeah, we could take credit for it. But we were building the pyramids while mammoths were still on the earth. Like that's crazy to me.
That's actually
somebody
I
was
never thought of
building
it
the
that way.
pyramids.
Well, I don't know.
I
thought we were taking credit for it.
Oh my God. But either way, like they've been out of our food chain, out of our environments for a very long time.
Yeah.
So why start with something that is already long extinct, that has, nature's already evolved past in a lot of ways, versus starting with one of the 50% of species that's endangered right now, and trying to use, and we'll get into CRISPR and all that and what you do, but trying to use some of this technology to do that.
Yeah, so we started, when I started the business, at the time we had no scientists. Before we even hired Matt, like we were like, I don't know, 4 weeks out from launching the business, and I called George, and I was like, you think we should hire someone that's like taking care of elephants and knows a lot about elephants? And George was like, oh, that's a really good idea. We should, that's a great idea. And I was like, well, and so then I was like, my job, I'm not a scientist, right? I'm not a conservationist. I'm trying to learn it very, very quickly because I'm passionate about it. But my job as an entrepreneur is just to build the team of the smartest people. So then I was like, okay, I have to go on the hunt to go try to find the #1 elephant guy in America, and then talk to him about mammoths and genetics and engineering, right? And so we started with the mammoth for a couple reasons. One, George had already been working on it. And, George likes to blame the media for the reason why he was working on the mammoth. But I think if you watch George Church's, like before Colossal, like watch him on the Colbert Report, watch him on 60 Minutes, watch him on all these things, there's this mammoth through line, and you can hear an inflection in his voice. You can totally hear him change. Yeah. And George cares a lot about elephants, and elephants aren't model species. They're not really studied in labs and environments. There's not a lot of assisted reproductive technologies for elephants. There's not a lot of people that are studying elephants and building technologies for elephants. So George's view was, if we bring back this charismatic megafauna being the mammoth, we'll get kids excited, we'll get people excited about conservation, and we can help the ecosystem, as well as we can make technology to help elephants. And he was already 8 years in the process, right? So he had been sampling mammoths. He'd gone to Siberia and gone out on these excursions in Russia and actually taken mammoth DNA and brought it back to his lab. He was doing all the computational analysis to understand more about the mammoth. And so George's technologies, and some of the technologies we needed to license from Harvard to get George and to get the technologies, the mammoth was a good place to start. And it's probably one of our longer, harder projects. So it's better start that and get that going. We have about a 40-person team on just the mammoth.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's escalated quite quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy.
And you think we're within like 5 years or so, maybe, of
the mammoth? Yeah.
Of what you can do?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, the mammoth is really sort of heavily driven by George's work on the gene editing genomics front. And now we're sort of accelerating, kept catching up to George on the reproductive front, because there's sort of two sides to the de-extinction equation, right? You're starting with gene editing and ancient DNA and trying to figure out what was a mammoth versus an elephant, and then how can you re-engineer the elephant to become the mammoth. But then you also need to be able to create embryos and put those embryos into surrogates and then take care of them. And that's a lot of what my team's doing. And so we're still playing catch up because George had a great head start. Also, elephant reproduction is really hard, but the pace and scale at which we're making advancements right now, I feel really good about the next 5 years.
When you say the elephant reproduction is really hard, are you really referring to like the length of the gestation period?
Everything, right? Everything from longest known gestation for any mammal in the world, right? A really difficult anatomy. Elephants are big. Their ovaries are really high up in there. Actually, their reproductive tract from their ovaries down to their vaginal opening is 3 meters. Right?
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's a
You
fun
gotta
fact.
get deep in there.
Yeah, that's actually a more fun fact than the pyramids.
Right. So there's a really long pathway that you have to travel to do a lot of those things. And we don't know a lot about physiology, their reproductive physiology. If you think about human IVF, you probably know somebody that's gone through it, and they've been on hormonal injections to help stimulate follicular development, or how can you get them to sort of go into estrus or menstruate at the right time. We need to do all those things. But the difference is, in humans, you could study people all around you. With elephants, we don't have that luxury, right? We're losing elephants every single year. We have fewer than 250,000 left in Africa, fewer than 25,000 left in Asia. So it's a resource issue, but what's amazing about Colossal is that we put money into a place that was in desperate need of money. We brought more eyeballs and more attention into a place that needed and deserved more attention. And so even what we've done in the first couple years for elephant conservation by helping accelerate and develop a vaccine against the deadliest virus
This to me is the craziest thing. And like Matt, I had no idea, right? Because like Matt, his whole life has lived in conservation, and the team that he's brought in lived in conservation and been fighting this kind of like uphill battle to save species. And I always thought, just not being fully educated on it, was that the number one reason why elephants die is just poaching. Like, people want their ivory, right? People want their ivory, or people want their ivory. And it is a big driver, but the number one killer is actually this terrible disease called EEHV. So when I learned about it, it's like it kills 20% of elephants a year. And
EEHV.
Yeah. Elephant endotheliotropic herpes virus. It's a latent herpes
I
virus.
just called it EEHV.
Yeah, it's much easier.
Yeah, I'm gonna stay with that too. But
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But it literally, and it kills the babies at the time of weaning. So it also kills baby elephants, right? So it's like the worst disease. Like, you can't make the story worse and worse. And so we've been working with a couple different groups, some AZA accredited zoos, Dr. Pauling at the Baylor College of Medicine, ourselves, and Harvard have been working to come up with a vaccine. So we're not going to cure it, right? But we want to do two things. One, we want to understand the disease, because if you're going to bring back mammoths, you should engineer in a resistance to this, right? Because you want 20% of your population to be susceptible to this disease, number one. And then number two, it has this halo effect of helping elephants today that we're open sourcing, right? We're just doing it. And I'm really excited that our first, like the most deadly form of EEHV, which kills the vast majority of elephants, we actually have a vaccine that is being tested in elephants right now. In elephants, and conferring resistance. So if Colossal, this is what I always like to talk about from the conservation side, because I'm not as deep as Matt, but if Colossal does nothing else in the world, right? We didn't make woolly mice, we didn't make direwolves, let's assume nothing else we ever do ever works. And we just solved that, and we save more elephants than all of elephant conservation for the last 200 years. Then I think we sleep pretty well at night.
I would agree with that, if that's the outcome.
Yeah.
So if I'm understanding correctly, and sorry if I ask some stupid questions today, but I really want to get to the nitty-gritty so we can all understand. But you effectively can use the experimentation of building a mammoth to then simultaneously work with elephants and solve the same problem, because they come from a similar.
Yeah, exactly. I think of de-extinction, people always say, well, why don't you focus more on conservation? You go, no. De-extinction and conservation are intrinsically linked. You cannot undo that. Like, they are together, because the research and development that goes into de-extinction is directly applicable to the conservation of currently imperiled species. And that's what we do. So if you think of de-extinction like a massive freighter, like a tanker going down the middle of the ocean, it's creating this huge wake. And in its wake, it's pulling elephant conservation. It's pulling conservation awareness. It's bringing conservation science. It's ancient DNA. It's being, genomics is being brought along with it. So we're creating attention. We're raising funds, right? $435 million in 4 years. I spent 15 years working in nonprofit conservation. I don't think I got to 10% of that number, right?
Well, that doesn't include we also started, which no one wants to talk about. This is crazy. We've seen so much success in a short period of time on the application of our de-extinction technologies for conservation. So it's not like you have to get to a mammoth and then you're like, okay, what did we build and what can be used, right? It's like on the path we're making technologies and it's being applied in real time. But we also raised $50 million for the Colossal Foundation. So we started a separate foundation saying we shouldn't be the only ones innovating in not just de-extinction sciences, but new innovative technologies. So we started a foundation whose entire purpose, which we raised $50 million separate for, whose entire purpose is funding researchers as long as the technologies they develop are new, they're for conservation and open to the world. And so we're now funding all that. It doesn't get quite the headlines as like mammoths and direwolves, but we think it's moderately important.
No, it's extremely important, and I think it's representative of maybe the new conservation funding model. I think people are a little uncomfortable with this idea that this tech startup, this for-profit startup, is in the conservation space, a place not traditionally seen by for-profit industry. But what we're doing is injecting momentum and money and eyeballs into this space, and I think that's only good for conservation. So I think sometimes when we get some of the pushback from the really conventional conservationists, I say I get it. We could talk all day about what you may or may not believe is great about what Colossal's doing, but what you cannot disagree on is that today there's more money and more attention on conservation than there was 4 years ago.
Yeah, I'll give you this weird stat, and then we can go where we're going. But I was trying to pull it up because I want to give you the actual stat. But
that's a wild shirt, by the way. I can't stop looking at that.
Well, yeah. 2025. We don't sell anything. So people are like, "Do you sell those or our t-shirts?" Because people like our apparel. I was like, "No," and then they're like. And then it kind of dawns us. We actually don't sell anything, but we do lose quite a bit of money.
But you do see Colossal swag in the most random places. Our buddy Forrest Galante sent us a text, and it was a picture of a tuk-tuk driver in Indonesia, and he was wearing a Colossal shirt. And you go, how the hell did it get out there?
Yeah, so
hopefully not in the losing Super Bowl category.
No, we did this thing. With every species outside of the conservation aspects that we're open sourcing our technologies for, and the de-extinction projects we're working on, we try to open source or we try to pair every single de-extinction with a species preservation. So not just like how can we theoretically potentially maybe one day use these technologies for conservation? How do we use them today? Like so. Obviously, it's the Asian elephants with the mammoth. With the dire wolves, it was the red wolves. And I'm trying to find this stat because it's amazing. I sent it to Bridget, so I'll pull up Bridget. Here it is. So this is amazing. Red wolves so no one is really talking about red wolves. It's the most endangered wolf in the world. It's the only wolf that's only endemic to the United States.
How many of them are left?
There's 15 left in the wild. Yeah,
15.
15, 1-5. There's about
they're technically extinct in the wild. In 1980, they were declared extinct in the wild. There was a captive population of some red wolves that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had the foresight of going, we better just capture what's left and put them into captive breeding situations. So there's 15 left in the wild that have been reintroduced. The population got up into the 150 range about 10, 15 years ago, and then it's had a huge crash again.
But here's what's crazy about like the dire wolf and what people don't realize is that and so I'm just reading these stats and I'll put my phone away. There's been 7 billion media impressions around red wolves on our videos and videos attached to red wolf. There's been 5.7 million views, 380,000 unique engagements, and it's over 1,000x fold when we went and looked at Google on people searching for red wolf or red wolf conservation on the first day.
On one day
that we launched the dire wolf. So no one's taught, and then then the Today Show a week after the dire wolf. We were on the Today Show the week before. A week afterwards, they did a whole special on saving the red wolves. They weren't talking about red wolves, no one was talking about red wolves. And so this is, we care a lot about the technologies, but there's, to Matt's point, we actually, Colossal, I think we do a really bad job of saying this. We are bringing awareness to things. Like when I saw these red wolf stats from our marketing team, I was like, this is incredible. So we sent it to all of the big all the various teams that are working on red wolves around the United States. And they're like, you've brought more attention to the red wolves in one day than we've had in the last 10 years.
Now that's cool.
Yeah.
That's
That's not going to save red wolves, but it at least starts the
People talk about it.
conversation.
It's an important step because in conservation, we talk about behavior change as one of the key steps for conservation. And the way that you affect behavior changes, there's this sort of chain of events. You say care, connect, and then conserve, right? If you can get people to, or I'm sorry, it's connect, care, and then if you can connect people to the issue and show them what it is, make them care about that issue, then they'll take conservation action. And so what we're doing represents that first step, that connection, to tell people that the red wolf exists, to tell people it's America's endemic wolf, and to let them know about this horrible, persecution the red wolf has faced in the wild.
What's happened there? Like how did you said it reignited to like 150 and then went back down to 15 in recent years?
Yeah, so
what's that over?
Sort of the drive towards of civilization and development in the United States led to some persecution of wolves all over our continent. Unfortunately, gray wolves and red wolves included. There were bounties on red wolves. There was everything. Red wolves also tended, now that coyotes have sort of been pushed into their habitat, tend to coexist with coyotes. And unfortunately, a lot of people are really excited about shooting coyotes. So also red wolves tend to get shot as well. So in the 60s and 70s, we realized, oh shit, this species is about to go extinct. And U.S. Fish and Wildlife took that really bold action to capture the remaining animals, or what they thought were the remaining animals, and start a captive propagation program. Starting in the early 90s, they started reintroducing wolves to this small part of northeastern North Carolina. That just was sort of on the heels of what was really successful with gray wolves going back into Yellowstone. So as they were doing that, they saw some early success. But unfortunately, societal attitudes towards wolves took a turn in that area, and people started not just shooting them, but then there's also a lot of development. There's roads that go through their habitat. Yeah. They're getting hit by cars. That's sort of their biggest driver of mortality right now. And even though in about 2012, 2013, there were more than 150, today there's probably less than 15 in the wild.
Now, where they released them in northeastern North Carolina, are there any mountains there or anything? Like, what's the terrain like?
Yeah, it's sort of like that piney coastal terrain.
Okay.
So it's kind of a damp, temperate forest. But there's also significant development. I mean, North Carolina is a beautiful place. People want to live there, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of human activity in the area. One of the things that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has talked about for years is setting up separate and sort of parallel efforts to reintroduce them to other areas, see if there's more success. So hopefully that's where we're going. But the big issue is the stock of animals that they're using for this reintroduction is from the captive breeding program. That captive breeding program was founded by 14 individual wolves. So when the U.S. Fish and Wildlife went in and grabbed what they thought was left of red wolves, it was 14 animals. Now there's about 200, 250 in this captive program. So you imagine 250 animals came out of 14. That's a very narrow level of genetic diversity.
Right.
So now they're seeing issues that could be related to genetic erosion, genetic inbreeding. And so we have identified, working with Bridget Von Holt of Princeton and Kristen Bresky of Michigan Tech, they've sort of identified, hey, that area in Louisiana where these red wolves were caught in the 60s and 70s actually still is a hot spot for red wolf ancestry.
Yeah, and actual DNA that's like not present in red wolf DNA that's not present in the existing founder lines in North Carolina.
Okay.
Yeah.
So couple questions here. Number one, does it affect, like when you take a population captive and now you're doing it in an enclosed area where they're not in their evolutionary environment to continue to evolve and roam freely, does it affect also the genes of the incoming, breeds that you're going to make? Let's start there.
So, I mean, being in we call it ex situ setting, so sort of outside of their normal, of the wild, basically. Think of captivity.
Yep.
It affects everything from behavior to the genetic expression of their genes, right? Epigenetics change, the sort of intergenerational heredity changes. So yeah, the answer is yes. You can't, unfortunately, it's unavoidable. You can't do that. However, there are great strategies for how to get around those things, how you can manage animals from a behavioral standpoint, how you can manage the population genetics of a captive group.
And there's a lot of people around the world, sometimes just a misunderstanding around Colossal is a lot of times people just put us in the bucket of like soup to nuts, right? Where it's like, we're going to take ancient DNA, make the animals, put them back in the wild. we're going to do it without oversight, without working with the government, without working with indigenous people groups, without working with ecologists, without working with conservationists. And that's just not the case, right? So like we have to rely on all of those people, right? And so like the current Red Wolf recovery team, which made up of like 25 plus different organizations, they've been doing a great job of like in a captive place, bringing red wolves there. They need more land. They need more strategies for rewilding, which they're working on. But, the genetic bottleneck's an area where we can come in, right? And so de-extinction and some of the technologies that we're developing around genetic rescue is not a replacement for conservation. It's just a new tool in it, right? And so if we can work with like Bridget von Holt, she's amazing, but she's the #1 red wolf expert in the world. Okay, especially from a genetics perspective. So she can tell you like this population over here that's not categorized as red wolf actually has more red wolf DNA in it than the population that we're actually recovering in North Carolina. And so if we can isolate those genes, if we can isolate that DNA, we can actually engineer in genetic diversity. We're doing the same thing on the Northern White Rhino project. So a lot of people talk about the Northern White Rhino, another great example. They're functionally extinct. There's two left. They're both female, no matter how much they love each other. I don't want to break hearts and minds or create haters here. It's like no matter what, they are not going to have babies. They just are not. I'm sorry. This is not a life finds a way thing. They are gone. And so we work with Biorescue and Dr. Thomas Hildebrandt. And Dr. Thomas Hildebrandt's amazing. He's insane. He's super smart. And he's leading a lot of these next gen assisted reproductive technology innovations. Like we talked about how we need those for elephants. We're working with him on elephants around the world. We're also working, he also is leading the charge to save the Northern White Rhino. And so with that, they think about extreme bottleneck, right? They only have 2. So they have about 18 embryos that they've harvested from 2 of those, from 2 of the remaining females. Well, over time, we've got to go back to museum samples, frozen zoo samples, all these different samples, and really build like this entire population genomics map.
Can you explain how you do that, if you don't mind?
Yeah.
Like what goes into that?
Yeah, a lot. So, and once again, I'm not a scientist, so I'll do the best I can.
Today you are.
Matt definitely not. I like to learn from smart people, right? It's kind of, this is like, I weirdly think this is I don't have hobbies, so I kind of feel like Colossal is my only hobby. And so
it's a good hobby.
It's a cool hobby, right? Yeah, it's like every day I get to work with people that are much smarter than me and learn. But
it's an expensive hobby.
Yes. Yeah, it's not the cheapest hobby. Like if golf,
you got a few billion. You're okay.
Well, golf would have been easier though. So, but that's boring as shit. So now I'm gonna get now.
Just for everybody else out there, I golf. I love it.
So now,
don't listen to
so
him.
You've recovered. Species recovery of golf for me. Thanks. So what we do is we don't make these sequencing machines, but what we do is we go take samples, whether it's ancient DNA samples, like in the case of the direwolf or the mammoth or the thylacine or other species, or existing DNA, and we run it through a system, right? So there's PacBio, there's Illuma, there's all these different machines that you can use, and it basically reads the code. So it spits out. My background's in software, so it's like I used to think that biology was just software. Now I realize it's the shittiest, weirdest software that's like borderline magic that you've ever seen. It's just crazy. So it spits out a code, right, and tells you roughly kind of like what letters go where in the full end-to-end genome. So you kind of get the genetic map of that species. So then you can use software, and we built a lot of models around understanding what's called comparative genomics. So we do a lot of that for our ancient DNA comparison to understand what genes made a mammoth, or what genes made a direwolf, compared to their closest living relatives. So that's the easiest place evolutionary to start. Well, with existing species like the Northern White Rhino, we can look at a lot of the big regions that drive morphology are the same, right? So you don't have like a rhino with like 5 horns, right? You see the exact same kind of patterns, but then you can look in different parts of the genome that aren't driving the morphological effects that actually have genetic diversity baked into them. So then we can engineer in that lost genetic diversity into cell lines and create embryos, or into existing embryos through microinjection, so that you actually get. So these embryos that now are 18 from 2 founder lines now could be 18 from 18 different founder lines. And so that's the power of like this concept of biobanking and genetic rescue, is like we can actually engineer in genetic diversity.
Hey guys, if you haven't already subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. It's a huge, huge help. Thank you.
So you could literally have a species that's on the brink of extinction or is functionally extinct, and you could engineer in that. And so like Dr. Thomas Hildebrandt and the biorescue team, they're not not coming to Colossal saying, "Oh, we can't solve this. Go solve this." They are very close to solving, making more northern white rhinos, but they're going to have the same genetic bottleneck issue. So we're now working. We're assuming success on all the reproductive issues that they're solving, and all the IVF issues that they're solving in rhinos. And assuming that success, we're over here working on, okay, how do we bank as much genetic material from all over the world, from all these different places, including museums, right? It's no different than how we're thinking about ancient DNA. And then how can we do all of these studies so that we can get all this data into a computer, do the comparison, and then engineer that into future cell lines?
And that, these are data problems, right? Like, unfortunately, it's expensive to harvest this data in order to do this ancient DNA extraction and sequencing, using all the computational tools needed to analyze that data and then make it publicly available. But, that's what I think, just Colossal being present in the area and researching these things, we create all this data and we just keep uploading it to the cloud, and we're making it available for other conservationists. So in a way, we're accelerating other people's research efforts.
As a for-profit, though, please go ahead.
I don't want you to forget that the for-profit, but I want to say this other thing about the data. So another conservation project we're working on is the northern quoll. Have you ever seen a northern quoll?
No.
Yeah, northern quolls are like the cutest little. I don't know if you pull it, but
let's pull it up.
Quoll.
Quell.
OLL.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, it's like a little squirrel.
Yeah, it's a little carnivorous marsupial from the northern
Oh, it's
territory.
carnivorous.
Yeah. It's awesome. Yeah, so
Meatheads.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so it's paleo.
My kind of guy.
Yeah, he's they're awesome. So they're going extinct in northern Australia. They're actually like, the pictures don't. I mean, they're cute in the pictures. Pictures don't do it justice. They're unbelievable when you see them in person. And what's crazy about this?
How big are these little fuckers?
Oh, they're, whatever that is. They're a little
okay,
more
so
than
they're bigger than a squirrel.
Yeah, bigger than a squirrel.
Yeah.
Bigger than a squirrel. And they're a carnivorous marsupial. They're only found in Australia. And what we, once again, not Colossal, we didn't build the pyramids, and we did not do this a long time ago, but we as humanity brought in cane toads somehow, some way, probably stowed on ships and whatnot, from South America. Cane toads have a neurotoxin, right?
It was an intentional introduction.
Oh, it was?
To try to remove the cane beetle.
Oh, it was?
That was an invasive species. Yeah.
So they introduced these cane toads, right? Which you should look these up. These are like, Jabba the Hutt motherfuckers. And so
they're ugly.
So and there's even, I think some of these photos are like glamour shots. That's what they actually look like. They're just these mean. Yes, we should win the war against like toadzillas. And so
that's the apocalypse right there.
Yeah,
you just upset a lot of
it's over.
Amphibian conservationists out there.
No.
Toadzilla.
But look, I think amphibian conservationists will also agree they should not be in northern Australia.
Exactly.
And so so they are introduced there. They have a lot of babies really, really quick. And if you look at the diets of quolls and other carnivorous marsupials, frogs are on the menu. They love frogs. They love toads. It's a big portion of their diet. But they have not co-evolved next to these toads, like some of these snakes and other mammals in South America. So when they eat them, they die. So the quolls are going extinct because they're eating.
Yeah, the cane toad excretes a bufotoxin.
Bufotoxin.
Yeah, and it's a neurotoxin that kills most things that try to predate on it, except for these species that co-evolved with them in South America.
And this goes back to that data. So what we found, so this is the importance of biobanking, sequencing, all these things, not just for genetic rescue, but what we found in collaboration with the University of Melbourne in Australia, who's incredible, and Dr. Andrew Pask, we actually identified these specific, there's one single change on that 3.5 billion letters, right? One single change confers a 5,000 times resistance to cane toad toxin.
What does that even? That's like crazy, the numbers to hear about. But what does that even look like? Like you say, it's one change. So you're literally putting a number in there, and that's
if
you're changing a letter.
Yeah, if you think about DNA codes for proteins typically. So this sequence codes for a specific protein. Proteins, their function are based on the shape of the protein that's developed.
Got it.
So if you change one base pair, it can change the way the protein folds. That changes the function and the ability of that protein to perform its function.
What do you guys say? It's like DNA is the software, protein's the hardware, and then the cells are the factory, something like that?
I think that's a great analogy.
It's actually pretty spot on, yeah.
I'll be here all week.
Yeah. You're like, well, I'm actually starting a Colossal on Tuesday. So we do have to, I think, express conflicts now that you're part of the team.
Right.
But what's interesting about this is, and so that goes back to the power of this DNA, right? So we need to be doing this, right? And so some people say, oh, genetic rescue or biobanking, we just need to save what we have. We do need to save what we have. Like I said, this is not a replacement for modern conservation. But what we do need to do is we need to look at these types of things, because now we can make super quolls. We don't have to engineer, we don't have to just eradicate every single cane toad in Australia, and we don't have to genetically modify every single marsupial in Australia. We just have to make super quolls. It'll make the quoll population come back. They will eat the cane toads. It'll suppress the cane toad population. Will they eat them all? Who knows? But at least suppress that population so that then it has this halo effect to the ecosystem of other marsupials.
And I don't know about your, when you were coming up through school, but for Ben and I, when we were in school, everybody villainized GMOs. They go, oh my God, there's this horrible thing about
They also told me that water, I was also told, I was the generation that was like, water is the most amazing thing in the universe. There's no aliens. There's only water. Water's only here. It's magic. Fast forward like 20 years, it's like it's in the atmosphere of Venus. It's frozen on the moon.
Yeah.
It's underwater. There's like entire lakes on Mars.
The aliens are here.
Yeah. There's water moons in our solar system, and people are like, well, what we knew back then was different.
But so we know more now, right? Like GMOs aren't just used for for corn. They had Terminator seeds and things like that. Now we have found ways to harness the power of genetically modified organisms to help recover ecosystems, to help protect endangered species. And so we're out there trying to pump up the GMO thing, which is a little counterintuitive to some health nuts out there, probably. But
what's their
Well, there was just
criticism?
a real fear of transgenic things and this idea that somebody has altered the genome of this thing, so you shouldn't eat it because you don't know what the effects of that could be. We know a lot more now than when I was in college, 20 years ago. And now I think we understand the power of GMOs and using not just completely made up genes, right? We're going and identifying genes that exist, that co-evolved with some of the problems we have, like cane toad predators in South America. And we can use those, and we already know the effects of those genes.
Is there still, I guess, straw manning this a little bit, is there still the possibility, though, that, let's say you make 100 different things, you could be wrong about one?
In terms of edits?
Yeah, and then it does cause a problem?
That's a great question, right? And so we do a lot of screening on all of this before we go. So it's like, going back to coding, for example, and this, once again, I think this is an educational opportunity. I'm a big, two big rules that I have is I believe in freedom, and I believe people can believe whatever they want as long as it doesn't hurt anyone. And so I think that also creates opportunities for education. And so for me, I think it's important for us to educate people on the fact that, we have at Colossal, I'd say if you take a step out of de-extinction, out of conservation, what is Colossal? Because I know you had questions on that in a second. Yeah. But we are arguably the number one computational biology and genetic engineering company that's using what's called multiplex editing, be able to edit all over the genome, as well as DNA synthesis, being able to synthesize parts of the genome and replace it. If you just look at our core technology stack, that is who we are kind of at a company. And those technologies, regardless of your application to conservation or your application to human healthcare or making a mammoth, those technologies are fundamentally transformative for the world, and people need to be innovating on them.
And you're going to have IP on that.
Yeah, and we have IP on that. So part of our business model is we've actually spun out 3 companies. We've only announced 2. The first was a computational biology platform called Form Bio, and it's all about identifying and doing genome analysis. So look at our genome, tools to start, and looking at how we can identify areas of the genome that could be used for drug therapeutics, right? And so we have a whole healthcare team that got spun out, raised separate different capital. That company's valued over $100 million, and it's just growing, which is amazing. We spun out a second company called Breaking. It's just breaking.com. Huge shout out to Sukanya. She's amazing. But basically, they discovered a microbe that emits an enzyme that destroys plastic. And not makes smaller microplastics, right? Actually, we call it breaking because it breaks the chemical bonds of the plastics, right? Which is incredible. So it truly disintegrates it. And then we used computational biology plus synthetic biology, being able to engineer and kind of speed up that process so that it can actually eat plastic and destroy it. Instead of plastic in never to 22 months, we're trying to get it down to 22 days. And we have 11 pilots already with that business because so many companies, textile, water treatment, all these places have plastics or microplastics. So there's huge industrial, outside of conservation, there are huge industrial applications and human healthcare applications to some of the work that we're doing.
Right, because my question was going to be a little bit ago, and you pretty much just answered it, like what the business is and how you plan to make money. Because what you've talked about, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is like when it comes to rewilding and things we'll talk about here at some point, you know, you're gonna give this away for free. It's not like you're selling a dire wolf for fucking $10 billion.
We're not getting like So
but you say 10 billion?
Yeah, I don't know.
Saves a lot.
I don't have that money.
We will make this just because we always want to be really, really transparent. We learn stuff every day. So two other things. So that was kind of like our phase 1 monetization was all about that. It was like very Apollo program-esque, right? Like you build technologies to go to the moon. You build a lot of cool stuff along the way because it's a systems model that you can innovate that can help the world, like in conservation, or you can make money. So that was kind of our phase 1. There's two other phases that we found that we didn't even know about, right? And so the second phase, George talked about this in the beginning. We didn't, it was early, but that's how George sorts it. George is like George will talk to you about like Alpha Centauri. Like that's just how smart George is. And he'll just assume that we can solve all the technologies of how to get to Alpha Centauri, right? That's just how George's brain works. And so he's already assuming that we have 10,000 mammoths. So he's like, if I model it out, this is what the impact of carbon will be in the ecosystem, and this will also be the impact of what you can get carbon credits or biodiversity credits. So what's interesting about George is sometimes he's called crazy, but he's proven a lot of people wrong for quite a long time, right? For 50 years, he's proven a lot of people.
First they call you crazy. That is always how it goes.
Yeah. And George is awesome. And so we looked at these things, and my view is, we can make money in technology. George's idea is kind of rewilding species, making money from the rewilding. So yes, we're not charging the conservation community, but there is actual money in the rewilding process, right? So you've probably heard in I think some of your conservation friends have probably talked about carbon credits. So there's a way to subsidize protecting forests and whatnot through this whole idea of carbon credits. Well, that's actually it's kind of like crypto. It's gone up and down. People have abused it. There's been there needs to be more regulatory oversight. That's all starting to happen. But now you've got people like PwC, the big consulting firm, and auditors. You've got even TPG, which is a huge venture private equity firm that raised $8 billion around this. You've got Lloyd's of London endorsing this, and so you now are starting to build certification processes. And what we're seeing in that model is that people are looking at carbon credits. They're also looking at biodiversity credits because they're actually being able to put a value on the animal. You know the whole hunting adage where people are like, well, if I buy a ticket to kill a lion, then we're putting a value in the lion, so therefore people won't. That's part of the that's what some people in the hunting world kind of.
Yeah, I don't love that logic.
No,
when it comes to the exotics. Yeah.
I love the idea of valuing the animal, right? That was their model of doing it, right?
Right. They're trying to backdoor it.
Yeah, because the reality is, most people don't have the same intrinsic value for animals or nature as you do, or as I do, or Ben does, right? And so we have to find ways to show value of nature.
Yeah.
And if you're living in the city, sometimes it's hard to understand that in the upstate, right? The forest and the biodiversity up there is performing nature-based services that make humanity possible.
Listen, we got a lot of biodiversity right here. I don't want to hear it. There's a lot of wolves running around fucking 57.
Yeah.
Right, but sometimes you're a little detached from nature and you forget that it impacts you. So one of the things that we've been talking about is how can we begin to show and evaluate nature-based activities? How can you put a value on a whale? There's this brilliant economist, Ralph Chami, that we work with, who wrote a really cool paper a couple years ago that said, how much is a whale worth? And they literally went out into nature, studied all the impacts that one blue whale would have in the nitrogen cycle and carbon cycle and biodiversity lifts in ecotourism in every aspect you can imagine. And they found that a blue whale every year performs about $2 million worth of ecosystem services.
How did they, and what was that based on?
So it was everything. Like I said, Ralph, who's this amazing economist, can kind of look at every bit and say, well, we know that that air quality has a certain value, and he'll break down everything, and the paper's incredible, and anybody can go read it. It's not a overly technical paper. I think people should look at it. But that's interesting because if you are driving a giant tanker ship through the middle of the ocean and you see a whale spout ahead, you have two options. You can say, well, I'm going to divert course so that I don't accidentally strike this whale, or I can stay on my course and risk hitting the whale. Well, today, it's a lot cheaper as a captain of that ship to just stay on course, arrive to your destination on time, and not pay penalties or have losses of product. Sure. However, if that whale's worth $2 million and your insurance provider has to cover the damages that you've inflicted on that whale to whatever country that whale's waters is in, then suddenly you go, well, it could cost me $100,000 to divert or $2 million to hit the whale.
And they're doing this in Gabon too. So they've done a similar. So people have taken this research and applied it now. So carbon credits around protecting forests and whatnot has been a thing. This new concept of biodiversity credits and like protecting the animals. So it's that same. It's not about hunting the animal. It's about protecting the animal and keeping them alive. And so they're doing this in Gabon and with forest elephants. And they're like they've done a study about how much the forest elephants in Africa do in terms of how much carbon value and ecosystem value they have. And it's $500 billion. It's insane. It's $500 billion. $500 billion, which is crazy. And this isn't our math. These are all these scientific peer-reviewed things. Whoa. And so our view is that if we can make if we can make mammoths and we make our thylacines, we make our dodos and reintroduce them back in collaboration with ecologists, conservationists, indigenous people groups, and governments, and even private landowners in some cases. If we are able to do that and we're successful at that, we can help restore these ecosystems. And in that process, we can get governments to issue us biodiversity and carbon credits, which we can go sell to the people that need to be carbon negative, that can't be carbon negative. Sure. We as humanity still live in some form of a extractive economy, right? And so we take oil from the ground, we take rare earth minerals from the ground, we take lithium. We our electric cars are based on lithium. We get these every year we get a new one, right? And so these are the types of things that we've got to find those balances. And so there's now an entire economy that's being built around helping companies. While the Apples of the world and the Mitsubishis and the Exxons of the world try to become more green over time, they do have certain standards they can't meet, so they have to spend money on carbon offsets and investing. Because
if you think about extractive industry, and this isn't to villainize anybody, these things are important to make the world go round.
Yeah, we came to your podcast based on extractive.
Yeah, 100%.
We couldn't have made it.
But if you think about extractive industry, we all basically subsidize their. We buy their product, and then we also underwrite all of the things that happen in nature.
That's right.
Because as they cut down forest, we lose some of the Earth's lungs, and that impacts us and impacts health. Yes. And then we start all these things are us subsidizing them and then paying them on the other end. So what's interesting about carbon and biodiversity credits, and I understand it makes people uncomfortable to put a monetary value on nature. But that's a little over idealistic, because the real approach is we need to find ways that you can truly cost account for the impact of the work, and then that person or that entity is responsible for helping to float the repair and the restoration.
I hate to say this line, but I used to say this before I did this. I worked on Wall Street, believe it or not.
Yeah.
But I used to have this line to people where I'd say, what are the two most important things to you in the world? And usually they'd say family and health. Mm-hmm. And I'd say to them, money pays for both. It sucks to say that, but it is unfortunately the way the world works. So I understand, like you say, look at it pragmatically. You have to. You have to start with that. And even some of the stats you were talking about earlier, where you're talking about getting attention on certain things, which relates to monetary currency as well, that makes sense.
Yeah. And our elephant conservation groups, I have openly told you, I didn't know EHV was a thing, right? Our elephant, we work with the top elephant conservation groups in the world, and they're like, you have brought more attention to this terrible disease than no one ever even knew about it outside the core community, right?
I'm very passionate about the poaching. I know all the stats on that. Yeah. I followed that for years, done podcasts on that. I haven't talked about this before, the EEHV.
Yeah.
That's like,
Yeah.
and that
The
goes to show
still,
you.
wait, just be clear.
Oh, yeah,
Poaching's fucking terrible.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, like, even someone like me who's pretty locked in on this kind of stuff, that's not something I was really familiar with.
And that's the cool, like that's the cool thing about it. Like obviously we're here, so I can't show you, but it's like every single week we get like kids and parents sending us like pictures of mammoths and dodos.
Just stacks of
just I mean like stacks of stuff, right? And so we can talk about the halo, we can talk about the measurable effects to ecosystem restoration in the monetization of that, right? We can talk about the technology spinoffs, but then there's this weird halo effect around Colossal, right? Where it's like, yes, there's things that people want to debate about Colossal, but no one can argue that we are not bringing attention to two things. One, wildlife conservation and issues that we need to talk about, gene editing issues, rewilding issues, conservation issues, as well as we're getting kids super stoked, right? Like literally every single week we get letter. Like last week I was finally back in my office and I had a whole stack of letters and papers, and I actually had this incredible, I need to take a photo of it and put it on Instagram or something. There's this person that wrote me a 3-page letter. I feel terrible. I haven't read it yet, but a 3-page letter.
You shouldn't admit that.
No, I just want to be honest. But I want to be honest. It is on my desk. It is literally on my desk.
A little long-winded,
It's like
buddy.
some
Sorry.
fucking 6-year-old crying at home now.
Yeah. No, but I am going to read it, and it's from Europe. And then this person made me this incredible, mammoth etching on wood, and it's just incredible. And talking about how they want to grow up and be a geneticist because of what Colossal's working on. And we all talk shit about and make fun of. We get the Jurassic Park comparison occasionally.
Yeah,
once or twice
a day. And but
took the words out of my mouth.
But if you go talk to some of the world's leading geneticists, that movie at that time got people excited about genetics, and a lot of people that are into the genetics field went into genetics because they saw Jurassic Park, not because they want to make fucking dinosaurs. Right. They just thought it was awesome. They're like, this stuff's cool.
Let's also not get eaten by them. You know what I mean? Like we gotta keep this in the box. Like I think of that first scene in I Am Legend all the time where the blonde lady comes out and goes, "We cured cancer," and then like 5 years later, everyone's fucking dead. They're all zombies, and I'm like, the road to hell sometimes we notice can be paved with really good intentions. Like it's not like you guys are fucking Bond villains out here. Fuck everyone.
But the reason I Am Legend is fiction is because that lady came out and said I cured cancer, and then they just pretended like they could release this cure to the world, when in reality we live in a world of regulation, right? So the work that we do every day is regulated by so many agencies: EPA, USDA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife,
Department of Interior.
They don't do the best job though sometimes. Let's be honest.
I'll tell you.
I lived through COVID.
I get it. But from our side, it is, it's onerous to have to be able to be responsible to all these people. So there are a lot of steps, a lot of forethought that goes into these things. We work in a lab. That's where most of our stuff is happening right now.
Well, but people think that's where all the stuff's happening.
was a lab too. I'm just saying.
Well, I think that lab had some issues.
Well, you said you took creatine this morning. That was also made in the lab.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, so lots of good stuff comes from a lab.
Yes. No, and that's where we got to be careful in society to not throw the baby out with the bathwater with stuff, right? Like there's this weird thing that's been happening that I feel like I'm always in the middle of having a show like this where you have like the pure establishment people versus the fuck everybody people, and it's based off of 1, 2, or 3 things that were just like an enormous clusterfuck that then everything else below that's related to that must 100%. Be bad, or like we're gonna trust the experts on everything. And I like to look at things on a case by case basis.
100%, and you can be doing really good things that also have negative implications, right?
For sure.
And you have to weigh all of that, right? And so those are the things that we have to do. These technologies, a lot of the core technology around genome engineering, we did not, like Colossal did not invent those that genie's out of the bottle. There's people that are going to use these technologies for nefarious cases, right?
And there's people that have already used these things in an unregulated way. There was a Chinese doctor that created a gene edited child.
Wait. What?
Yeah.
I must have missed this one.
Yeah, it was a few years back. He got in a lot of trouble for it, but he was
alleged trouble.
Yeah, allegedly.
He's
out. You got a stern talking.
He was off the grid for a couple months.
That's a whole nother podcast, by the way. Like this guy is.
So he made a gene edited child. Yeah, and it's like real. It talks.
Yeah. Well, apparently it's in China, so obviously we don't have as much transparency into it.
Let's get him on the podcast.
Yeah, he probably would. He's out there, man. But he got in a lot of trouble. Supposedly, he went to jail. Allegedly, he's out right now. But that
he did
is
he did germline editing.
Yeah.
In a
there it
weird
is.
series of events, there's a meme account of his on X and that follows Colossal. I
We're
swear to
not
God.
certain it's a meme account.
No,
I'm
it
pretty sure.
did get Antonio from MIT has exposed, believe it or not, has exposed who it is. You won't believe who it is, but that's a whole another podcast too. But
so it's not him.
It's not him actually on X, right?
It's so good though.
Yeah.
When we came out the woolly mice, it was just a picture of him and it said woolly mice are a bioweapon.
Yeah, it said woolly mice. And so he's just been trolling us, right?
It's so good.
It's so funny. But this is the kind of stuff that
This is the guy though, right?
That's the actual guy. But this is the stuff where, to your point about intended unintended consequences and negativity, like, people, there's a general moratorium on doing germline editing, meaning edits that can be passed on the next generation in humans, right? They're now starting to
It's a good rule.
Yeah, it's a good rule. And but what he did obviously violated that, right? In China. And so but this is where the technologies go, right? Like, a single a disease like sickle cell anemia is a single gene mutation. So you can do a single knockout for that, and you can get rid of you could literally get rid of sickle cell anemia, right? And so that there are now people that are looking at
one universal adjustment. You're saying
one universal adjustment, yeah. Okay. So to people that have it, but obviously that would be effective
if you're a carrier,
it would end it.
Yep.
End the line.
Yeah.
And so those are the things that now biotechnology companies and the U.S. government and kind of the World Health Organization, they're all looking at this, right? Because like, how do where do we draw the line? Where do we help, right? Where do we eradicate disease? Like, Gary Brecka will probably punch me in the face for this, but Gary's awesome. I don't know if you know Gary, but
I'm aware. Yeah.
So I love Gary. He's done a lot to like change my life and how I look at stuff. But one thing that I haven't totally not subscribed to is I do take a drug that basically turns off a PCKS9, which significantly lowers LDL. Just so my family has crazy high LDL, right? Even if we ate just nothing but kale, we'd have crazy LDL.
That was your thing too, right, Alessi? Wasn't Louisa saying you had like crazy LDL? Yeah.
So that was So you can take this shot called Repatha, and I take it. I'm not a shareholder, and I just take it, and it does lower it by about 60%. Just the LDL doesn't fuck with triglycerides or doesn't fuck with HDL. So it was great. Now there are people that look at kind of the whole system. Gary's one of those people. So we're like I'm still looking into it, but right now I have been taking it. But that's an example where one medication, like I didn't take a gene therapy to change that. I'm taking a medication to just silence that gene.
Right.
And so that's the power though of where we're going with this technology. And I think that most diseases are multigenic in nature, meaning that there's multiple genes that have to work together to cause a disease state. Some of those are genetic diseases. Some of those are in concert with environmental factors if you have core genetic dispositions to them. And so for us, Colossal will never do that. But to your point on technology, we are working on multiplex editing. So being able not to just do that single edit to sickle cell anemia or that single PCKS9 edit, but being able to edit multiple genes at the exact same time with high efficiency. So I do think that some of the multiplex editing technologies that we're developing will have massive pharma implications. Now, the good thing for us is we're just going to license those and we'll spin those out into other companies. And then there's other people that need to work with FDA.
So it's not your fault.
We are just.
But the lawyers are happy right now.
It's a really good example that, in this anti-GMO world that we sort of were living in, I think we're coming out of now, is that people had this complete distrust of anything GMO. But you could take a random chemical and put it in front of somebody, and you'd say, "Oh, you have a headache? Just take that." And they're like, "Yeah, pop it." Right?
Yeah,
that's kind of crazy.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. When Ben first came to you with this, though, Matt, like what were your thoughts? Because you're coming at it from the more.
It was over drinks.
Yeah. If I do anything, it's probably a drink.
Know your audience.
Put a little GHB in there.
Know your audience, right?
Yeah. What were your thoughts?
Ben did some recon. He knew that the safest place to approach me was in a bar. So he did. So Ben and I had this mutual friend that sort of connected us about, and I was playing golf with this guy, and he goes, "Hey, I know this guy that's bringing back mammoths." I was like, what the fuck?
And if
Like,
you know
Like,
this
there ain't
mutual
enough
friend,
weed in Narnia.
if you know this mutual friend, that's exactly how he talks.
Yeah.
He's like, and he would bring it up. So I could see Adrian bringing it up just that weirdly
it
casual.
was just like, yeah, I know a guy bringing back mammoths. I was like, I'm trying to get the fuck out of here, right? And then he was like, no, seriously, you should talk to him. And so he connected us on text, and Ben's like, hey, you meet me at this place for drinks, and we'll talk about this thing. At the time,
Do you remember where our first date was?
I don't remember. It was at that outdoor cafe. I don't remember what it was.
That's cute. You remember?
Yeah, I do. There was a candle.
It's 2 candles.
but they, the funny thing was that we were coming out of COVID, and I had been running a zoo in Dallas, all the animal care for the Dallas Zoo, and I was burnt out, right? It was sort of that time of like self-reflection. I mean, that's when you sort of pivoted too, right?
Yeah.
Like you kind of have this
Same,
weird,
right? Same.
yeah. You have this weird. You're isolated and you're thinking a lot
first
about
day of the
yourself, and
pandemic.
the impacts that you're going to have in your life. And I was like, I was just honestly dissatisfied with the level of impact I was making on conservation and the fight against biodiversity loss. This guy.
Why though? Like because you felt like a zoo wasn't enough, or it was just like there's more out there. What was
there's
main
more out there.
driver?
There's ways to have a larger scale impact. I thought I had a very satisfying career. I had worked at big zoos in Miami and Dallas and Tampa, and I'd done a lot of fun things, met incredible people, some of the most passionate, incredible conservationists in the world. But for me, I thought I want a larger, more lasting impact. That's just who I am. I'm driven that by some of that, by saying I want to have a fingerprint on a big piece of something, right? And at that time, Ben's like, I'm making mammoths. And I was like, this is ridiculous. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. But, you said drinks. I'll meet you there. So I go out, we have drinks, and he brings it up. And I think, the first reaction was sort of like, yeah, okay. That's cool. George Church is an impressive guy. I get it. You guys have money, which was interesting. I think at that time it was just a seed round.
Yeah.
And then
It is more expensive than $15 million.
it is like, turns out that was a massive underestimate. But
Balance sheet problem.
but Ben, I challenged a few things. I had a few questions. Have you thought about X, Y, or Z? To Ben's credit, because we haven't thought about that. We know nothing about animals. And he
We
goes,
know nothing about animals, but here's a mammoth.
he says, but I think you understand what this means for conservation. I said, absolutely. And we started talking about the conservation impact. Ben, to his credit, was like, we're going to change the world for conservation. You're going to get to do it. We're going to go get more money. We're going to make more technologies. We're going to have larger impacts. And I was like, fuck it. I'm in. Let's just do this.
I asked you, I was like, the truth is we didn't know anything about animals at the time. We knew that we had some software nerds and we had some geneticists and we could try to figure some stuff out. But I think that's one of the things that we're really good at is also saying what we don't know, and we're not afraid to be like, oh, we don't have a solution to that, but it's a good feedback. The whole course of our company, like our chief science officer, Beth Shapiro, was like one of the most negative people on the planet towards Colossal when we launched. She actually wrote a book. She wrote a book before we started that says how to clone a mammoth. I don't know if you're going to read it, so I don't want to spoiler alert, but it ends with you can't. So I was like, she's perfect, right? Our head of bioethicists.
Then how much did you pay her?
No. We went to her because
I'm a ball breaker.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
You're in Jersey.
Yeah. So, it's the first time in Jersey.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
You've never been to Jersey
He goes
before?
he goes to the city all the time and doesn't cross the river.
I'm offended.
I've been to Brooklyn one time, so don't
That's not Jersey.
No, I understand it's not Jersey. I'm just saying.
Christ.
I just try to
Get
make
out.
Sure. Yeah. But it is a cute neighborhood. But but I did say to Matt, I said to Matt, we don't know these things, and we want to solve these things. And I asked him, I said, what if we could give you $50 million a year for elephant conservation? And Matt looked at me and he goes, you would completely change elephant conservation more than any. I was like,
with 50 million?
For 50 million, and I was like, can we do 50 million a year? And he goes, it would completely change everything. I was like, okay, well, we just need to get to the point where the company's making $50 million a year profit, and then let's just change all of elephant conservation. And I think that part of one of my issues in the, I guess, the brokenness in my, or non-brokenness in my neuroplasticity is that that to me doesn't seem that hard. Like we just have to go build a business that can make $50 million.
You've done it before.
And then and then we can just give it to conservation.
Yeah, how many companies have you like spun off?
From Colossal.
No. Yourself before this.
This is my sixth company that I've founded and ran.
Yeah, you've done this. You're not missing any meals. Like this is you've been around this block. Yeah, I understand why you think that way.
But so I was like, could we raise? We could just make, all we have to do is make $50 million. You're telling me if we make $50 million in profit and I give it to you, you can help fix elephant conservation? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, all right. That doesn't seem that hard to me.
But Beth, who, to your point, wrote a book literally saying at the end, like, you can't, she ends up coming around. So what does that?
So the other thing is, let me give you two other examples and we'll loop them all together. Our head of bioethics, Alta Charo, she's amazing. She's literally the best. Best. They're all the best. But she's awesome. And she debated.
She's a New Yorker.
Yeah, she debated. She debated George Church and was like, we should never bring back mammoths. And when I talked to her the first time, she's like, have you thought about making a tomato? And I was like, well, this is gonna be an uphill battle. but it's like, but you want the people that have. So the way I think about it is, you want the people that have thought about all the bad shit, right? You don't want the people that just say, fuck yeah, we should go do this. This is amazing.
Yes.
We can get a lot of those. We got a lot of people that love this business, right? But we want the people that are at the top of their field that have challenged this for years, because that means they've thought about it for years. The person that just gets some random interview that's at like Western Cincinnati State that's like never done anything in their life, that person isn't the top of their field. So let's go find the top of their field that are also not pro this. And so another person that was not very nice to us when we launched was a guy named Luva Dahlin. He's the #1 mammoth researcher in the world. #1. He's at the University of Stockholm.
How do you rank like mammoth?
There's an official world ranking.
Yeah. And he's got he's
like,
at
no.
he's at the top of the leaderboard.
It's like it's good for marketing.
No, he is. Like, I mean,
but he's highly published, highly respected.
Yeah. We're gonna get a GitHub for mammoth people.
That's a good idea.
No, it's a great idea actually. But he's done more mammoth research, more mammoth publications. He's driven the research in understanding the evolutionary tract and all the genetics of mammoths more than anyone in the world. And when we launched, he was pretty negative, and we called him, and I think he was a little confused when we called him. He's like, well, I just talked shit about you in the press. Why are you calling me? And it's like, well, you're the #1 guy in the world. And so now 59 of our like 65-ish mammoth genomes come from Luva.
How did you turn him? How did you take him from that first call?
Yeah, I don't think it's that hard.
It's not that hard. And people ask that. It's like, people say, oh, you sold them, you persuade them. It's like,
people think it's money all the time, and half these guys don't get a dime out of this. But what it is I think everybody has the same superficial reaction, right? They all go, well, have you thought about these 5 bad ideas? And you go, yeah, we thought about this, and they go, okay, well, and then they start to stretch. What about these 3 things? And then you go, yeah, here's how we're addressing it. And then suddenly they go, I'm comfortable with this. What about, have you thought about trying this and doing this? And suddenly the excitement comes out.
So with Alta, I actually said, she gave me some feedback about like ethical frameworks and all this other stuff. And so I came back and I wrote some, and I just sent her an email. I was like, are these good? Are these a bad idea? And she was like, I think the fact that we are not just open to criticism, but listening to the experts, right? There's a lot, this. There's a lot of difference between the ex-couch experts that know everything, right, in the world about every topic, right? We've got those people. Those people are just annoying, right? Yeah. But people that are like the top of their field, head of the leaderboards, that are negative, you should at least hear them the fuck out. Yeah. And so and I think the fact that we don't just listen to them, but then we try to implement what they say. So Alta and I started this conversation where we were going back and forth, and she was like helping us think through regulatory and ethical. And by the way, at the time, super anti-colossal. And but I think the fact that we were listening to her, and that we did the same thing with George, the same thing with Beth. And with Beth, I said, join our advisory board. Like, we're doing this. Maybe it'd be good for you to have some oversight so you can tell us what we're doing wrong or shit all over it, right? And then that led to us then saying, we got some ancient DNA. I was like, we don't have the best lab to do it. Can we? She's got one of the top, at the time, one of the largest ancient DNA labs in the world at UC Santa Cruz. And we said, can we use your lab to do this? And she processed it. And I was like, and we got better results with her lab than this other lab we were using. And then we were like, how do we get better results? Why do we ask a lot of questions? And I think that level of vulnerability and transparency with the world leaders in these various fields has brought them in, and then our relationships with them evolved. So
what do you think? So going from the last chapter though, where she says you can't, and now where she is now.
So I was sitting with her, and I was like, I agree with you. You can't bring back a mammoth. You cannot. They're not living cells. They're not clonable cells. But I was like, don't you think you can engineer one? And when you ask these, like the thing about science is if you say,
yeah, that seems like semantics.
Yeah, well, that's all fucking science is. And so, like, I can give you 1,000 examples of semantic arguments in science, and the reason we don't live on the moon, and the reason we don't have like trips to and cold fusion and shit is because of semantics and science. So, I truly fundamentally believe that. But I asked her that, and I said, but do you think that we can understand enough about the genome, do comparative genomics, and edit and engineer one? And her response was, yeah, I think the technologies are here today to do that. And so that's the thing that's interesting to me is I think that all of science, sometimes this is not a popular statement, but I think all of science, we are moving to a world when you look at access to compute, AI, synthetic biology, and all of these tools where we're going to move from scientific experiments to engineering. And so that is the world that we live in. We now have the tools. So it's about knowledge and understanding, access to compute and AI, and then having the tools to engineer. So we're moving to a scientific engineering world, less of a scientific experiment world. Like we'll be able to run full simulations where you don't even have to do wetware experiments.
What does that look like?
It would be amazing. So you could figure out like what are the potential off-target effects or unintended consequences, like you asked about in the genome, that you could do that all in a simulation because we'll know enough about gene-to-gene interactions and the various sub-pathways. That's incredible. So
are you leveraging AI to do that?
Yeah. So our company would not be possible without AI.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy because also like AI was something that in 2015, 2016, 2017, a lot of the smart people in the world were really talking about, and I got really into it because I'm like learning about this, like holy shit, this is crazy frontier. And then there was like this, at least publicly, not you guys obviously, not the people working on it, but there was like this pause button for like 5 years, and no one really talked about it. And then one day they're like, ChatGPT.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
LLM
now it's
to me,
just everywhere. I mean, Joe's in the studio today. We were going through like he's a scriptwriter, so he was going through like how he was able to develop like a whole cartoon concept based on his script with what was that
Yeah,
ChatGPT 4?
and Sora.
That's fucking
Sora stuff's amazing.
It's insane, like how far it's come in the last couple of years. So you guys, but it's almost like you guys got to be looking at your watch, going like, "Where you been, everybody? Like we've been on this shit."
Yeah.
But I feel the same way about de-extinction, right? 10 years ago, we were talking about how, you watch Terminator, like Skynet is AI. We can't unleash AI on the world. And now people are going, well, you watch Jurassic Park. We can't unleash de-extinction on the world.
No, my favorite on the Jurassic Park people is people, we literally get the question like, didn't you see what happened in Jurassic Park? And there's almost this like assumption that it was real for a minute. And I love that. It's like,
that was
art imitates life, though.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it predicts
I think
some
what's
stuff.
great about Jurassic Park is it asks some really challenging moral questions, right?
Yes.
And that's great. And for people like Ben and I, when we get asked that all the time, it's the whole Jeff Goldblum. Your scientists were so busy wondering if they could, they forgot to ask if they should, right?
I should make a preoccupied shirt.
Yeah, you should.
Yeah, you should.
That would sell.
Yeah.
We don't sell anything.
I know, but
I'll
saying
send it to you.
You're going to start selling stuff.
Yeah.
No, I think that the technology, spinning out the technologies plus the long-term carbon credits, I think that we'll have a multi-billion-dollar ARR business, which I think's pretty interesting.
Fuck the merch.
Yeah. We'll just make it more exclusive,
It's just
right?
loose change in the couch at that point.
I do like a lot. Like I didn't have to ask you this, and you were just running through it with several examples. I do like that you've gone out of your way over the years of working on this to reach out to people in, say, the evolutionary biology field who are not amenable, at least at first, to what you're doing, because that was going to be a question. It's like, would you want to talk to some of the critics and the people who are not just like excited about, fucking dire wolves and seeing you on Joe Rogan and seeing you on the Today Show and all the hoopla around it, who may have concerns about this distracting from the things they've worked on? I mean, I mentioned Paul Rosolie, obviously he feels that way. Actually, Aless, can we pull up? He did an Instagram post on this. Do you have that? Can we pull this up? Because this would be good. Address this head on.
No, I love it. And I mean, look, I'm on the board of trustees of the Explorers Club, and there's a lot of conservationists. We have ECAD on the Explorers Club annual dinner on Saturday. I'm sure I'm going to have a lot of feedback from a lot of people. Yeah. But that's okay. That it creates.
But you take it. I like that.
I mean.
But I think, with the whole distraction narrative that happens, Colossal is a media circus, right? Colossal brings a lot of attention, brings a lot of excitement. But the idea that it's a distraction is a false narrative, because that's assuming we live in a net zero world where there's only so much attention that can be put on conservation. But what we know is that there hasn't been enough attention. So we're bringing more attention.
Right.
So that we can still pay attention. And Colossal does a great job of highlighting conventional conservation. De-extinction does not work without habitat. So we have to work with people that protect habitats, that restore habitats. We can't bring back a northern white rhino without having a place in Uganda for that northern white rhino, right?
And what was the, just to have this out there, we talked about this at the beginning, but I want to re-drive this home so you can get this out there right. The logic of working on things that have long been extinct versus the things that are in danger right now, which you're still working on.
Yeah.
But it's like of saying, yo, we're going to bring back the dodo. We're going to bring back the mammoth. We're going to bring back the direwolf. It's strictly to be able to test on your test tubes to be able to relate it to current species.
I think it's three things, right? I think one, it's a harder systems model, right? So if we work in DNA that's not ancient DNA, we are solving harder problems, and it's vastly more applicable to more recent species. If you solve an end-to-end, like the de-extinction process is a systems model, so you have to solve the entire innovation around everything from ancient DNA and assembling one. Well, we have those same problems with extant species and with our DNA, right? So you're solving harder problems. That implies that you're making better technologies. So that's number one. The second thing is, we're working on species. The vast majority of that, we actually are doing more conservation work than we even are doing de-extinction work. But the de-extinction work that we're doing, we're working on species that, for the most part, will have an ecological benefit to their return, a cultural benefit, a spiritual impact in some cases. And then the third is, to Matt's point, on the attention side, you'll get people excited about these technologies, right? And so there's all these different, debates on everything that or not everything, but a lot of things that we do. But when you do it in that side of things, not only are you bringing the attention, but you're building technologies that are harder.
Right.
You just simply are, right? And, it's not our job to persuade the world about it. It's our job just to educate people what we're doing and create the conversation, right? And we don't even care if it creates the conversation. It just seems to do it, right?
Yeah.
Which we find, moderately interesting.
Which is good to have it in the public forum too, where you can have. I like that. Like this can be talked about publicly, and it's not just like behind closed doors, people bitching at each other.
The other thing though is it depends on how people want to go deep, right? If people want to go listen to a multi-hour Joe Rogan podcast or your podcast or get really, really deep, so like Time, when we launched the direwolves with Time and with New York and a few others, they went really deep. They spent hundreds of hours to understand the science, to understand where phylogenetically, we've had what's interesting is like no one talked about the fact that we brought up Pleistocene wolf back. Everyone just wants to argue what to call it and classify it, right? And so, people call me and they're like, "Are you upset about that?" And I was like, no, people have a right to do whatever they want, right? And so my view, though, which I think is important, is that, at least to me, is that regardless of what some of the quote unquote controversy is on this, we are advancing the tools and advancing the conservation, and at least our conservation agenda, pretty quickly. And we actually had a lot of feedback after I don't know if you saw the Woolly Mouse. I don't want to get away from what you want to talk about.
No,
but
please, take your time.
But the Woolly Mouse, I don't know if you saw that project that we worked on.
No.
Can we also pull up a picture of the Woolly Mouse? Because it is you could hate Colossal.
Yeah, and
But
not a real species, right?
Yeah.
This is
you could hate Colossal, but these are objectively fucking cute. You can't not say that, right? So
it's a little puffball.
Yeah, and so
It's like a Cheeto.
And so what we did to do this, and then I think this leads well
and
into
that one on the right kind of shows an unedited mouse versus what we did.
Yeah, and so
they're little.
Yeah, they're mice, right? We didn't make one misconception is people think these are the size of mammoths. They are.
That's false advertising.
They are not.
Not yet.
And so,
Right.
yeah,
don't do that.
What are you doing? Yeah.
Don't do that.
And so what I'll tell you though is like, we actually took. So in a just talk a little bit about the science, and then it'll lead, I think, really well into the direwolf. Is that what's interesting was we've identified, and we're in the editing phase of the Mammoth project. That means that there's about 85 genes that we have to edit. We're not trying to clone a mammoth. We've been very, very clear about that. We're not trying to clone direwolves. We're not trying to clone these animals. We're trying to make the exact replication of that. Right? That's kind of silly. We think that kind of like coding, if you can write, if you talk to anyone that's written any code, they say, oh, I can write 3,000 lines of code and it does X. And then someone else says, I can do the same thing in 5 lines of code. Everyone objectively in software will say, do it the second way, because there's less things that you can fuck up. There's less things that you can break, right? So the better we do computational analysis and the smarter we are on the comparative genomics and identifying the core genes, the less edits we have to make. We're not trying to make, like, I could have made 1,000. We have the technology Colossal. We could have made 1,000 plus edits in the direwolf, which would have blown people's mind from a genome engineering show of force perspective.
Super animal.
But it doesn't make a super animal. It's not more direwolf. If you have
it's something
edits,
different.
It just doesn't make more, right? If you look at it from truly a mathematical perspective, it doesn't have a true mathematical reasoning. And so with the woolly mice, for example, we made 8 edits. Right? Even some people say only 8 edits. Most people were doing it 1 edit at a time. I mean, they'd edit a mouse. They'd then edit the next generation with 1 edit. They'd edit the next generation. And they go through 8 generations of mice to what's called stack those edits. Using our technologies and using multiplex editing, we delivered all of those edits 1 time. So 1 generation of mice. From a health perspective, we also do monoclonal screening, and then we do genome sequencing, full genome sequencing on all the embryos.
How long did this take?
1 month. Well, because we had built the system, right? So that's the thing, is like we started the woolly mouse project in September and October of last year. We had woolly mice.
Wow.
And so, but what we did is what we did, which I think sometimes is lost on people, is not only is the multiplex editing and the fact that we had nothing but healthy mice born with exactly the physical attributes or phenotypes we wanted, was we don't want to just go test in elephants, right? Because it's non-ethical. 22-month gestation. So you have 3 ways to test to see if your mammoth edits are working. 1, you can test them in silica and test them do functional tests in cells, which we're doing. 2, you can grow what's called organoids. It's because a little science fiction. Organoids. Which this is a little. It's cool. It's a little science fiction weird. Where we actually have hair follicles that are growing mammoth hair. So they're live, but they're not a full system of an animal, right?
It's like a plant.
I mean, it's a very
like an air plant.
Yeah, a very, very, very small plant, right?
Real quick, Ben, can I just go pee? Real
Sure.
fast? All right, we'll be right back. All right, sorry about that. This is actually the earliest podcast we've ever recorded because my bladder in the morning is so bad. So apologies to everyone out there. But Ben, you were talking about growing like just a hair.
Yeah. So to test whether we got these whether the genotype to phenotype, the editing is working, the second way is growing organoids. So we're growing organoids and we're testing it, but that's still not a full animal. And so we came up with many people use what's called a mouse model, because mice are very well studied in laboratories. And so what we did was we identified all of the genes that we're working with mammoth. There's about 200 million years of genetic divergence between elephants and mice. So we're not just going to take a random gene from a mammoth and ram it into a fucking mouse and like hope it works, right? But that's also like an animal welfare and ethics thing, right? And we're certified by American Humane Society, the oldest humane organization in the world. And so we want to do, but we also have standards of how we do all this stuff. And so what we did is then we used AI and compute to understand what are the mouse equivalent of these mammoth genes, so to see if we're on the right track. So we took those genes, we delivered them all in 1 edit, in what's called multiplex edited array. It then made, we got 100% of the edits in, which is nearly unheard of in multiplex editing. Typically these things have like 15 to 20% efficiency, where we have 100% are right under 100% in most cases. And what's crazy about that is then, 22 days later, our mice were born, and then they grow, and we got exactly the phenotypes, right? So what's great is we could test this in 20 days versus in 22 months in elephants with little risk. And these guys like blew people's minds and went crazy. I didn't realize they'd be the internet sensation.
I was shocked when Ben said, hey, we're going to go public with the woolly mouse. I thought, well, that's just ridiculous, especially knowing we were coming out with direwolf soon. But then when we broke the internet with a mouse, I was like, holy shit. What's going to happen with these wolves?
Yeah, but I will say when we came out with direwolf, some people that are, there's about 20 scientists that are consistently not our biggest fans, which is fine. Like we're not we don't care what they, if they like us or not. I think it's our job to just keep doing what we're doing. But one of the feedbacks they got is they've lied to the world because they had this mouse and we were mad at them. Or they literally, there's quotes from a handful of these folks about how they were excited. They're like, ha ha ha, they're only working in mice. They'll never make it to what's called the non-model species, like a wolf. And they were like, the entire time they were taking this negative feedback from us when they had these secret dire wolves. So then this small community was somewhat frustrated because they felt like they were laughing at the fact that we were here, even though, by the way, the woolly mice are a genetic, like they're a huge achievement for genetic engineering. They're an insane achievement for genetic engineering. And they thought, oh, if they're here, that means that they won't be anywhere else for 10 years. And then we delivered 20 edits in a non-model species being a wolf, right? And so, which I'm sure we'll get into. But the woolly mice was something that, we were really excited about because it just shows kind of the application of the intended targets on genes, what the intended outcomes would be, and more importantly, all the mice were healthy.
Yeah, you had said before we paused for a second back there, you had said a line where you were going, we're not, to be clear, we're not cloning these species, we are
engineering
them, right? So that seems to be some of the criticism with respect to the dire wolf, where people are saying, okay, you took a gray wolf.
Yeah, which is 99.5% a dire wolf.
Right. Yeah. So you took something very close, and they'd leave out that context to be fair to you.
Yeah.
And you edited, I forget what the number was, 8 or 14 genes.
14 genes, 20 edits, yeah.
Okay. And so it's really just like a gray wolf with some edits. We can't know for sure that it's actually a dire wolf. Like, how do you respond to that?
So I'm sure we'll both have different responses to that. I think
we got different responses. I like this.
Well, I think we'll be additive to it because I think we look at it from a different perspective. There's about 31 ways to classify a species. Just so you know this. So there's not one way, right? Like we were taught in school, I assume we're both taught the same thing, which was the biological ways. Like if things can't breed with something else, it's a species. That is what I think generally they get taught in the textbooks. But a polar bear and a brown bear, I don't know if you know this, those are different species. And I think if you look at a polar bear and then you look at a brown bear, you're like, okay, one's aquatic and white and cold adapted and one isn't, you would be like, it makes sense those are different species. They mate all the time and have viable offspring. So by the biological definition of speciation, they should be the same species. But I think you could look at them and say, well, that's dumb, right? And so once again, I'm not a biologist. I'm not a conservationist. I just am a person that likes to ask weird questions with smarter people than me. And so I was like, well, that's weird. And then there's what's called the morphological definition, right? Where it's like, if something looks like something and has specific, so this is where polar bears and bears trade. And ironically, so do wolves and dogs fall in this category. And I hate to break people, dire wolves were wolves. And so what's interesting about that is that, there's a morphological concept, which is that if it has specific traits to serve specific ecological functions that aren't found in other things, then it's its own species. That's classification. And what we know about dire wolves is that they were before Colossal, here's what we knew about dire wolves. They were 20 to 25% bigger. They had a little bit stronger, they think they had a stronger jaw and had a little bit larger craniofacial structure and jaw. And then they had, and then based on the bone density, they think they were heavier, stronger, more muscle. That is what is known definitively about dire wolves before Colossal. They didn't even know where the lineage was. They didn't even know where in the canid family they fell.
Before Colossal.
There was a paper that came out, which ironically, Beth Shapiro and half the people on our direwolf paper are on paper were on the original paper around direwolves because direwolves were popular because of Game of Thrones. Scientists, believe it or not, really do like the limelight. I found over the years. I thought that working with engineers in Silicon Valley was challenging, but I learn and adapt, right? We all do. And so, but what's interesting is that the conclusion about 5 years ago from this paper before Colossal existed was we don't know. That was the conclusion. But believe it or not, the media read that and said because the paper mentions the paper mentions jackals. So then it ran with the headlines were Game of Thrones direwolves were jackals, not wolves. So that was that got into the zeitgeist, right? So then everyone just read the headlines. Nobody read the scientific paper. No one looked at the phylogenetic charts. So there was just this belief that they were jackals. Which was actually an incorrect media interpretation.
They don't do that.
No, never. They're spot on. And so really smart people think they were jackals. But if you go ask anybody on that paper, even if they hate Colossal, if you go ask people on that original paper, they say, that was not the result. Our results was, we don't know. And that's because they had about 0.15x of the genome. And so they didn't have a full complete genome. We got 13x, meaning that we had, we talked about the genetic code earlier. Yes. And that means that we got a full read of both of our genomes, because we have two genomes. One is 13,000-year-old tooth and a 72,000-year-old skull. So 60,000 years of genetic divergence between our two genomes, right? And so we got 13 reads of it. So we actually were able to identify the core genes that are what's called conserved. So we talked about genetic diversity in the genome earlier. So the things that really made a direwolf, and what we know from a phenological perspective, right? Like we know about craniofacial, we know about size, and we know about coat. Well, one thing that we discovered that nobody knew, because there's no hair of direwolf to be known to exist, is that they were white. And what's funny is there were all these different, because there's a season where people thought they were related to jackals, that there are paleo artists that designed them, painted pictures of them where they were, pre-generative AI, where they were red. So people were like, no, but direwolves were jackals and they were red. Well, that's just incorrect. That at the time, it was actually incorrect because the paper came out with it's inconclusive, right? We now know definitively that they were closer to wolves than jackals through our deep genome sequencing. And we also identified that their coat was white, which is amazing. And what people don't also realize, you mentioned the gray wolf stuff, which I know we'll get into, is that there's 60,000 years of genetic divergence between our two direwolf samples. If you
60,000 years.
60,000 years. But what people don't think about is that there's less than 60,000 years between our wolves of today and our 12,000-year-old tooth, right? So we actually understand. I think Colossal has about 500 times more data on this than anyone else in the world, which we're now starting to publish so that people can kind of go through it. And so if you, like, people say, well, you're not making a mammoth, you're just making a genetically different and genetically edited Asian elephant. It's like, but that's what mammoths were. That they're just different, they were just genetically engineered by nature and in a very slow and efficient way. Like we have been doing, you talked about GMOs. We've been doing crossbreeding and genetic engineering for a long time as a society. Like look at a fucking pug. But we've been doing that, like no wolf thought one day it was gonna be a fucking pug, right? But we have been doing that and doing selective breeding for traits for a long time. We
like manually
nature,
in a way.
we've just been really shitty at it, right?
The old-fashioned way.
Yeah, it's old-fashioned day roll of the dice, right? And so it does not bother me when people come out and say that our dire wolves are genetically modified wolves, because that is a factual statement. We said that in our press release. We said that in our paper. We say that on our website, right? We're not secretly saying, oh, we have 400 million edits in this thing and no one will ever know.
Right.
So we've been very clear about what we did. And the issue really is that, even if you go talk to, there's a DNA concept, there's a morphological concept, there's so many different concepts. And if you look at the phylogenetic tree of life, of all life, 99% of the classification of species and where they fall in the tree of life is morphological. 99%. We have not done the DNA sequencing on 99.9% of what's alive, let alone everything that's been extinct. And we can't on some of those because some of them are just fossil and there's no DNA. Right. But if you look at even just what's there, we have not sequenced less than 0.1% of the Earth. So to hold this weird, it's a little, it is a semantic argument.
Yes. Well, and we get a lot of the, is it 100% direwolf? And it's just, that's like, you can't even start with that question because that assumes that all direwolves are 100% the same. And to Ben's point, we have 60,000 years of divergence just between our two samples, but the species persisted for hundreds of thousands of years, was from southern Canada all the way down into northern South America. So if you were a direwolf in Venezuela 25,000 years ago, the good chance that you were not identical, you're probably very different than a direwolf 150,000 years ago in Idaho.
Here's the other thing that is not your guys' fault at all, and I have to call out everyone in my industry or in industries close to it, because it is unfortunately how things work. When Time magazine comes out with a fucking incredible cover, I might add, it was amazing, right? Yeah. They're on an even tighter restriction than we are. Like when I write a title about this, let's start there. You guys are going to be called like the direwolf team or whatever, right? So that's going to be the back characters. I have 100 characters on YouTube, and really what I want to do is get the actual base of the title down to 60. Yeah. Right? So I got, what do we got, Alessi? Maybe 8 to 10 words to work with, something like that. Yeah. Which means I can't write out a title saying this de-extinction company has genetically engineered a dire wolf or something close to it with 14 gene mutations. So it's not necessarily exactly the dire wolf. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. Exactly. I have to write They made fucking direwolves.
Yeah.
And when you look at Time Magazine, they have to go de-extinct or extinct no more.
Yeah.
Right? And so then the average person, me included, we quickly see that, oh, they brought the direwolf back.
Yeah.
And we don't get the context
Yeah.
of you sitting down and saying, here's exactly what this means. Here's what this translates to. Here's why this isn't necessarily confirmed as like a literal direwolf, but why it's actually something that can be painted to that phyla or whatever.
And we're
You know
talking
what I
about
mean?
some really complex technical
Yes.
things that require a lot of nuance. And so I
Yes.
totally understand knee-jerk reactions or some sort of, superficial emotional reaction when somebody goes, that's incorrect. Totally get it. I think as a scientific community, as a conservation community, we could do a better job of communicating to the public in a way that's more understandable. But there is a real desire for most
Yes.
scientists, and we talk to Beth, our colleague, about this all the time. Is like, sometimes it's okay to be a little more general because we need to bring more audience to the table.
And the thing is so a couple additional points on this is, once again, the media, some of the headlines were misleading, right? Believe it or
Just
not.
sitting at home like, fuck.
Yeah, and so, but what's crazy is like they're like, but scientists disagree. It's like we have 95 scientific advisors from the top universities in
Yeah,
the
they
top
say it
of
like
their
it's
field.
everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, we also, but that's also to discredit the 172 people we have at Colossal, with 140 of them being scientists that left academia. So we have 95 scientific advisors outside of the 140 people. So just to be clear, some of the scientific community disagrees, right? And those are the people that people want, because people want clickbait, right? Like that's what they want. Now, to Time's defense, Time, and even though New Yorker fucked us and broke the embargo and made my life very painful for a couple of days.
I don't know about this.
Oh, you don't?
No.
Oh, we'll talk about it. Yeah.
Okay.
This is. I'll go 4 fucking hours on this thing. Okay. So
allowed to, Emily?
So
She's saying yes.
But to their credit and to Time's credit, they spent 100 hours with us. They came to the lab. They saw the direwolves. They spent time with the scientists. They understand. And the results, we didn't say, hey, go make a salacious headline or go say they're direwolves. That was the result, that was the conclusion that they came to after talking to experts that are affiliated with Colossal, not affiliated with Colossal, after going insanely deep on it and spending 100 hours. Right. Their conclusion is, based on looking at the fact there's 31 ways to classify it, there's no species on the planet that falls into every 31 categories. Very few even fall into 3. So less than 10% of categorization works, right? And because that is a general view, right? You talk to Kenneth Lacavaro, the #1 paleontologist in the world, who discovered the largest dinosaur in the world, Dreadnoughtus, which is fucking incredible.
What kind of dinosaur?
Dreadnoughtus.
The largest dinosaur ever discovered.
If you ever want, he's in New Jersey.
Let's get him in here. Let's
go. He's just awesome.
I want a dinosaur podcast. I'm into this.
He's your guy.
He's your guy. He's incredible. But I mean, he'll even argue semantics, and then he's like, well, technically, polar bears should be the same species. I mean, so then he'll go down this whole thing as brown bear. So he'll even debate this even internally, right? And but what I'll tell you is, when you spend the time with it and you understand all of it, you can come to a conclusion of, wow, this is a scientific incredible feat for humanity, that nothing's ever happened like this before. This is like the moon landing of genetics. And you can come to that it's a direwolf, or it's the closest thing. Like, we have our website pulled up, but if you go to I don't know if I could do this. If you scroll up and go to our main menu, and we have to build a new website because there's so much shit on here. If you click de-extinction, if you go scroll up one more time, sorry, top left, yeah. If you click de-extinction, so the first button on our website is de-extinction, which nobody clicks on, which is crazy. If you scroll down,
well, it's a little hidden.
It's hidden. It's only the first one.
We'll work
with
you.
So if you scroll down, just scroll down a little bit for it, right? Scroll down because it's about conservation. If you stop right there, right? So what's funny is, since the direwolf launch, Wikipedia has been edited on the extinction page like 1,000 times.
But it used, CIA.
Yeah, but it used to. We love the CIA.
To be clear. That was Julian. That was not
sitting there
Colossal.
yesterday, so maybe we got to check the wires around here.
Yeah. So, but before Colossal launched the direwolf, the Wikipedia definition was the process of generating an organism that resembles or is an extinct species. You cannot. We think that, and if you scroll down a little, if you just stop. So we think that was flawed. Now, because of the direwolves, that page has been completely rewritten to drive a certain agenda, which is interesting and weird in itself. But what's crazy is, we think that engineering a species to look like another species isn't enough. We could do that without ever using ancient DNA. We just have trait engineering.
Yes.
The second thing is, it's not possible to clone an extinct species, as Beth wrote in her book, and we have said from day one, right? So if you scroll down a little bit further, we actually talk about it's just a little bit further, right there, yeah. Was that we think that's perfect. We think about rebuilding extinct species for today, and so we have this concept that we put out years ago, and so this is on our website. This isn't like some like hidden board deck that's like not available to the public. It's functional de-extinction, right? The process of generating an organism that both resembles and is genetically similar to an extinct species by resurrecting its lost lineage of core genes, because we identified the core genes that made a direwolf a direwolf. But there's a lot of stuff in there, even between the 60,000 years of genetic divergence between the two direwolves that we had, that aren't core genes, that weren't conserved over time. So we identified the ones that were conserved over time, and then we also want to engineer natural resilience and enhance adaptability so they can thrive in today. So if you scroll down just a little bit further, and we pause here. So going back to EEHV, there will be, if I could clone
the elephant disease,
the elephant disease. If I clone a mammoth, which is not possible, if I clone a mammoth 100%, which is not possible, and we're not doing it because it's not fucking possible, and we've never said it's possible. But if we cloned a mammoth 100%, couple things. It's not going to have the same gut biome, because it's not going to be birthed by a mammoth who ate the exact same things, number one. So we know that the gut biome affects us. It changes how our behavior, it changes a lot of things about it. Here's the other thing. We know definitively that that mammoths were susceptible to EEHV. That means that, so if we engineer a cure for EHV, and I do not put that in here, that means if I put those edits into our mammoths and then make them confer resistance to EEHV, and it was 100% a mammoth. I got the gut biome right. I used a time machine to get the right mom. I nailed everything. But I'm like, you know what? We should make the change so that 20% of mammoths don't die. Then everyone in the world could be like, oh, then at that point, it's your mammoths are now no longer mammoths, right? So these are semantic arguments. But I think of it from an ethical responsibility perspective. If we have the ability to rebuild extinct species, which we are at our core, we're a genetic engineering company.
Yes.
We're not a genetic cloning company or a extinct cloning company. We really want to think about engineering these things. And going back to the coding example, if we can make less edits and we can get the core phenotypes, if you look at our direwolves, if we want to pull up any pictures of our direwolves, they are...
Yeah, who's your photographer, by the way? There's some good fucking
There's some
pictures.
good ones.
Yeah, there's some good ones. And so he's here in New York, Andrew Zuckerman. He's awesome.
He's good.
Yeah.
Shout out Andrew.
So
please continue.
But I think Ben's point is really good. And as sort of the token animal guy, we could try to edit.
Token.
Yeah, right?
Well, it's chief animal officer.
Yeah, chief animal officer.
Which is a
man.
great fucking
It's the best
title.
job title ever, right? But, one of my primary mandates at Colossal is to ensure the safety and welfare of the animals in our care. Right. And part of that doesn't just mean once the animal's born, it's my responsibility. It also means that as we're designing strategies to return species from extinction, we need to have welfare as one of our paramount concerns. To Ben's point, we focused on core edits. We could have taken it further. We could take it further today. We could go to 100,000 edits. We could go to 4 million edits. But every time we do that, we're increasing the risk of the outcome being less than optimal for that animal. And we have to ensure the health and welfare of every animal. So we'll take a stepwise approach. And what gets missed often is that 9 years ago, an international independent group of people that run the IUCN, that's the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and the Species Survival
They're
Commission.
like the UN of species.
Yeah.
Okay.
They wrote a white paper on proxy species rewilding, which is essentially what de-extinction is today. And what we did is there was something like 36 points that go through there. If you are going to pursue this endeavor, these are the considerations that you must make. And we went point by point through that thing, and we developed strategies that aligned with exactly that. And one of those is, at first, you need to take a cautionary approach that ensures the health and safety of your animals. Nailed it. You see those dire wolves? I mean, it's
pretty fucking cute.
Yeah. Adorable, healthy.
They look happy.
Amazing. Extremely happy.
Are they fucking eating people yet, or
just people we don't like?
Okay.
Yeah. But and now yeah. And we'll actually, we decided that we're going to write up a little draft and we're going to share it with the world so they can kind of see where we align with this guideline, because we took a lot of time and consideration to go into that. And now people sort of dismiss it. You haven't listened to any international experts. Bullshit. We took your playbook. We just did it. Right? Like,
Can we scroll down and see the bigger wolves? Because if you keep scrolling, Oh yeah, here's a whole click thing. You can click
Also,
through
what's amazing is I now have the most famous hands in the world.
this. Yeah, your hands.
Oh, those are all your hands every time?
Yeah.
That's funny as shit.
And so we have healthy animals with genes that have not been expressed in 12,000 years. But I want to give one. So this goes back to rebuilding. I want to give an example because no one actually talked about this. It's in the fucking press release, but no one talks about this. So with the edits that we made, there were 15 of them that were specific ancient DNA variants from the direwolf, right? But we chose 5 that weren't. People, no one's talked about this, which blows my mind. So I mentioned earlier that we now know definitively that direwolves were white. I can't say that, this is me being around too many scientists. I can't say all direwolves were white, but 60,000 years of genetic divergence, both those were white. I'm going to say statistically more than likely they were white.
And
right?
a significant geographical distance as well. We're talking Idaho and Ohio.
Yeah, and they're during the Pleistocene, so it kind of makes sense that they're white. But one thing that's interesting is we know that the specific variant of the gene that the direwolves have that made it white has been studied in canids. So we also, once again, people think that this is just colossal and they discredit the fact that we have science. The number one person in the world in canid genetics and canid evolution is a woman named Eleanor Carlson. She is at the Broad Institute. The Broad is most famously known for the one that fought Jennifer Doudna in Berkeley on the whole CRISPR wars. Where was it invented at the Broad? Was there? So the Broad's it's about as high of an echelon as you can get. And she is as high as an echelon as you can get when it comes to canid evolution and genetics, right? And so we worked with her, right? We didn't just do all this as even just the colossal people, right? We're not drinking our own Kool-Aid here. And we actually identified that the gene specific for that made direwolves white has been known, and this is evolution selective in natural selection, has been observed in wolves and in dogs to sometimes cause blindness or deafness. So from a purity perspective, some people will be like, we should put the fucking gene in, right? From an animal welfare perspective, that's stupid. So we actually did trait engineering on the white coat color. So we know definitively that this gene made direwolves white. We know it's 100, or we at least know that R2, just to be fair to scientists, is that we know that at least R2 samples were white, and we think that probably means that most were white. We then said if we put this exact gene in, it's not 100%, but there's a non-zero probability that we could cause some negative effect on the animal welfare. So what we did was, just like in the woolly mouse, we identified a gene that made it the same color, right? So all of the coat color, all the coat thickness, if you scroll back if you go back 2 pictures, yeah, all of that's all their genes, right? That make it this crazy Arctic thing. They have this level, they have this mane up there. We didn't know that right from the fossil, right? We didn't. Yeah. So that's all direwolf specific stuff that we've never seen before. But what I'll tell you is that white, we knew that the gene from the direwolves made it white, but we know that it comes with some risk. So we didn't put it in. We chose a different gene. This is where synthetic biology comes in. We chose synthetic biology to be able to engineer life or doing full DNA synthesis where you're engineering little blocks and putting it in. So we did that, and we put in a gene that would make it the same color that we know direwolves were without any risk to the animal. Now, from a purist perspective, people would argue that, right? They'd be like, that you made it less direwolf. No, you didn't. If you go to the morphological species concept, which is still what 99% of the entire fossil record is based on animal classification, is what we classify our direwolves on. But some people would say, well, then you made it less direwolf. No, it still has the morphological thing, and we did it without having any risk. It's the same argument with EEHV. If we know EEHV, improving. Yeah, if we can improve the species, why not do it?
Why do it? Yeah, and I mean, you know what the core question is here, and I haven't asked it all day, but do you ever, and this goes to both of you actually, because this would be anyone on the team.
It sounds hard. You should start.
Obviously, as a founder, do you ever sit up at night and wonder if you're playing God here?
I think we play, going back to your mentor, I think we play God. You saw the force cut down. We play God every single day, right? We play God. I take God when I take Repatha on some level in my body, right? I take God. You play God when you add more creatine to your body, right? We play God when we burn down the forest that you've seen with your own eyes, right? When we overfish, when you overfish the ocean. We as humans are playing God every single day. We just are, right? We that is where humanity is. We are eradicating species. Like the thylacine, the Australian government put a bounty on their head to kill them. They didn't just naturally fall off the planet, right? And so, so we choose to do that. So we think of this as a way that we can, if you look at technology as currently humans like apex innovation, well, why don't we start using that technology to do really great things that could help the world and inspire the next generation?
And here's real fast, Matt. I just want to make sure we hit this. Here's what I would view as the difference between what you're saying is the example of playing God and what I'm getting at. Everything you're referring to are things that we do on accordance of our own free will already created here on Earth.
Correct.
What you're doing is getting to the beginning of the foundation of the actual creation. So it is you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
it's a little
That's a
bit
good point.
different to me, and I'm not saying it's bad.
Yeah.
I'm saying like it's heavy as fuck.
Heavy as fuck, and you better have people that feel that weight and feel that responsibility. And I think that was when, going back to that first meeting with Ben and some of the conversations I had with people in my personal life afterwards, when I said, am I going to take this hard right turn out of my career into this psychopath new company, right? I said,
a study recently came out that like 40% of CEOs are psychopaths.
Yeah,
I saw that on Instagram.
In my
and I was
experience,
like,
it's 100%.
And I was like, I have to flip through that faster.
But you have two options there, right? Like Ben said it earlier. The cat was out of the bag on this thing. Somebody had to do it, and somebody challenged me in my life, and they said, you have two options. You can sit on the sideline and cast stones and be pissed when they do it a way that you don't agree with, or you can jump on that ship and help steer it and help take the helm. And that's where I feel more responsibility. Your kind of point about how heavy this is spot on. But I'd rather be at the table helping influence that thing. And I think that's where some of our skeptics that don't really use critical thinking, they just cast stones, they're missing out.
This is a great point too, because like anyone who we always see throughout human history, regardless of what it is, people are always afraid of the new technology.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is, though, based on the law of numbers of population and innovation and people who are going to try stuff, someone's going to do it.
Yeah.
So it's not to like rectify every single thing that happens, but it's like if you can't prevent it, and we know as human beings we can't prevent innovation, it just happens. It's better if you know in your heart your intentions are good. It's better for you to actually, as you say, have a seat at the table and try to steer that. And it is cool, again, like, Ben, it's one thing for you to be a business guy and come at it from that level and whatever, but then you have on your team, I mean, your co-founder is a scientist, right? You have on your team guys like Matt who are coming at it from the conservation and ecological realm. Like that, what you're striking me today is being someone who understands the important balance right there, which is what I do want to hear. Now, we'll see that in practice as this goes about, but that's
actions
cool.
speak louder than words, right? We can say whatever the fuck we want, but you have to like see it, right? And I think the fact that we go towards our critics, that we are honest with everything that, we put out there, like I think those things speak louder than, just quote unquote trust us.
Right.
And I think one of the things that I feel like one of my superpowers is especially in today's world, I'm not afraid to say what I don't know. I don't know all of those things. I don't know all the ripple effects to the ecosystem. I don't know the ripple effects to conservation. I don't know those things. So what my job isn't to know those things. My job is to find and identify the smartest women and men in the world in these topics and bring them together.
Have you run into any problems? I shouldn't even say problems so far, but almost like arguments in your head where you have the capability to do something.
Rabbit hole.
Where it's more high level, I think, but I'll let you decide. Where like you have the capability to do something and you want to do it, and then you're talking to so many different heads, whether it be from conservation or science or whatever, and it's almost like the motions being stopped because there's too much clutter, and you're like, do I push through, and like, is it a risk if I push through because this is taking too long, or do I pull back and then we don't actually innovate here? Do you run into that?
I think for me, I really do trust our C-suite, right? It's like I feel like we've brought the best people together, and so I actually feel like I don't have that burden. Like there's not been a decision, and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's not been a decision where like our chief science officer, our chief animal officer, our VP of data, and all these people have said we absolutely should not do this, and I'm like, we should do it. Let's just go. So
yeah, we haven't gotten that. I think that's been really good. And think for me, coming from this conservation background, and I know how sort of typically reserved and conservative the conservation community is. I always come out as a little I undersell it a bit because some audiences don't like the big, bold, audacious brand that Ben built. I get it. So I'm always trying to temper that for them. And then often I actually get the inverse where I'm like, well, we could maybe think about this thing. And they go, we should do this. And suddenly the excitement comes out and then it feels better that there is a community that also supports that. Because that external validation is extremely important because we live in this insane bubble right now at Colossal, and we're doing amazing things and we're getting a lot of attention. So sometimes you can get a little echo chambery, but that's where the 95 scientific advisors, the 25 conservation advisors we have on our board, all of our academic partners, all the people in my life, all the people that we get to talk to doing this, that get to ask questions, and they can validate concerns, they can validate ideas, and sometimes they'll shit on things and you go, yeah, you're right, that was stupid.
And also your history, though, of going to the outside of people who end up coming onto the team and whatever. And when we were on the break real fast, you were reading what we're going to read in a second about Paul, and you're like, we'd love to talk to him. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. So let's actually pull that up now. Let's read that because it's going to lead into a question I have about the evolutionary aspect of this and what the capabilities are there. Do we still have that, Alessi? How many screens do we have pulled up?
Too many.
All right, there we go. All right, perfect. So this was a post he put up with a meme of Brad Pitt from Fury talking about the news on dire wolves. And Paul's also like a very funny guy and a great writer too. So he's got good sarcasm in here, I think. But he said, everyone is being fooled. It's the ship of Theseus with no water. These are genetically modified gray wolves, not dire wolves. I listened to the podcast. He was referring to the one you did with Joe Rogan. I've spoken to the experts. Everyone feels the same. Amazing science project, cool stuff, but this is not conservation. There's a lot of amazing work being done to save species and ecosystems all over the world. So many heroes saving species. The dire wolf thing is just sci-fi clickbait, and it's robbing too much money that could be used to actually conserve the species we have here, and we've addressed some of this today, already in more effective and impactful ways. These people talk of productionizing species. They are cloning dogs for rich people who can't let go of their pets. And he did talk to me about that one. That was kind of funny. And in doing so, exposing a terrifying gap in basic logic. They don't get it. You can't clone grandma and expect the meatballs to taste the same. It's a copy of grandma, not the woman you love.
I agree. I totally agree.
Same goes for animals. This whole thing is exposing people's enormous amnesia for reality. Salmon have been hammering themselves up streams and against rocks for millions of years to become salmon. Only the strong survive the journey. They are inextricably tied to and the product of their environment and their history and context. Just as each species is tied to its ecological context. If you take a poison dart frog out of the jungle, it ceases to be poisonous. And he was explaining to me that's because they eat
ants.
certain they eat certain insects that allow that bile or whatever to be created. And an orphaned tiger can never be wild without a mother tiger to teach it how to hunt. Animals have complex cultures. There's a sacred cycle and a natural order. We must protect our species, respect the wisdom of the wild. So my question's going to be like,
I think it's really well written.
Yeah, actually, let's start. Like, what do you think of?
I mean, clearly, Paul, I've listened to Paul on your podcast. I've read Paul's books, right? Like brilliant guy.
Yeah,
amazing writer. I wish I could express myself that way.
Yes.
I think there's one severe flaw in the argument that he's presented here, and that is assuming that de-extinction is a replacement for conservation,
which it just isn't. And by the way, we are the de-extinction company that is saying that. We don't need the conservation community to say that. We say that.
Yeah, we believe that de-extinction is a part of conservation. It's one of the tools in the toolkit. It is an enhancing, accelerating factor for conventional conservation. As I said earlier, de-extinction doesn't work without habitats, so we have to start with habitat preservation and habitat restoration. All his points on sort of animals and it being in situ versus ex situ, totally valid. But those same arguments could be made for things like the red wolf captive breeding program. Well, yeah, we had to. This was a last resort. This was not our first choice. Nobody said, it'd be really cool. Let's just pull the wolves off the landscape so we can do whatever we want to the land, and we'll just keep them in a zoo. People make the same argument about biobanking, this idea of creating frozen tissues, that there's a moral hazard that if we can sort of put something on ice and ensure it won't ever go extinct, then why should people care about extinction?
Right.
Well, the real issue here is not enough people care about extinction already. I think Colossal is doing a great job of bringing more eyeballs to
the
this
awareness.
problem.
The awareness is definitely a great argument.
It doesn't. Extinction doesn't affect people like in your mural there, right? most people in there don't think about extinction every day. It doesn't affect people on a daily basis, so therefore they don't think about it every day, right? And I don't come from the community, so I am not as familiar with Paul as Matt is, or as you are. But this also is assuming a zero-sum game, right? So I like to say that there's one less shitty app that exists because we raised money from technology investors. We didn't go out and take money from the foundations that are giving money to conservation. This
wasn't a WWF funded project.
Yeah. So we're not taking money away from habitat restoration. We're bringing money from technology people that invest in AI companies and technology companies. We are having them invest in this business. That is 99% of our investors are from technology investors, the long-term and technology investors that invest in things like SpaceX and OpenAI and those types of technologies, right? And so now they're investing in a company, and we've got them and our board to agree that all the technologies that we have that we make an application to conservation, we give to the world for free. So this is new money coming into conservation. We're almost, I think of us as like a research and development lab for conservation, right? Yeah. And to your point, you said this earlier, like new technologies are scary, right? And so what I assume Paul, and I don't want to speak for Paul, but what I assume Paul and other people will say to this is they're going to say, yeah, but it's not 100% direwolf, so we can't call it a direwolf, and he'll go down one speciation argument, which he's not wrong on, based on that one definition, but there's also 30 other definitions.
Right.
The second thing is, I think that based on what he said, he's worried about is this is going to take money away, which it's not. That implies that there's a finite supply of money. This is shifting money from technology development into conservation. And then I think the third thing,
you guys have made some great arguments on that today.
But once again, in Paul's defense, he just read I have no fucking idea what article he read. He read some clickbaity article about it.
Well, he did talk to 11 evolutionary biologists.
Which is great, but he should also talk to, we have 48 conservation partners.
He's friends with some guys who are involved with your project, by the way.
Yeah, that's great. But when we love to talk to him, right? Because once again, you can learn a lot more. Paul is an informed critic, right?
Yes.
So you can have critics.
Very informed.
They're dumb. And then you can have informed critics. We love informed critics. Even if they don't like everything we're doing, you can learn a lot from them. Right?
And what's great is when you have those conversations with people like Paul and other informed critics, what you end up walking away with is you go, 95% of the time, we're completely aligned. We're arguing about 5% of a topic here.
But sometimes that 5% we're totally wrong on, which we're cool with. We're not going to do everything right. We're just like that's not going to happen. And so in that, we have to have these conversations and learn better. But the other thing that Paul's pointing out, which I think is very valid, is that there seems to be a concern that this is a replacement and that it's going to get people not focused on conserving land and conserving ecosystems. And he's spot on. We have to do that. But the thing that I think that Paul has missed in this, and I'm not speaking negatively, is that when we started the business, the external peer-reviewed scientists, not Colossal's never said this outside of reference to other things. It was forecasted that we were going to lose 15%, 1.5. It's now forecasted that we're going to lose 50. So we can conserve all the land we want, but I don't think it's going to trend that line. So we have to do that, and we have to biobank as an insurance plan. Mm-hmm. It's so fucking expensive to bring back species. It's not feasible to bring back every species. Anyone that thinks that is insane.
And like Paul says, it's not grandma.
It's not.
We can create a functional replacement.
Yeah, the clone and the dog thing. That I think that was sticking in them, just because it's it's not the same. You know what I mean?
We're not a dog cloning company.
Right.
So
that's more symbolic, in a way. Mm-hmm. But that's the kind of thing that maybe for someone like that, he's like, all right, come on, guys.
Yeah,
you know
I totally
what I mean?
get that. But that one point Paul makes in here is that this money, Ben already highlighted, this money isn't being taken away from conservation. Yes. It's additive to conservation. We get a lot of people that come to us and say, you've raised $435 million for the business, $50 million for the foundation, so $485 million. What you should be doing this with $500 million.
Right.
And my argument is, yeah, you should. You should go raise $500 million and do that thing that you think is the right answer. And I will support you and I'll help you raise the money. But this is how we believe we can be impactful to the world.
This is your line of expertise.
This is very.
I always say this is such an existential problem that we need. We need an entire tapestry to solve this problem. Yeah. This is an existential threat. Loss of biodiversity and ecosystem collapse is an existential threat that will affect how we as humans can and live on this planet. Yeah. We're one thread. And I like to say to the critics, if you hate what we're doing, that's great. But like some of our biggest critics, I'm like, they're like, oh, well, you're not doing stuff enough for elephant conservation. It's all good. I was like, well, how much money have you spent on elephant conservation? What are your checks? And we can do it a percentage of income. I'll tell you what I've spent. You tell me what you've spent. We'll do a percentage of income. And because I don't want to be not fair to different socioeconomic statuses. But then separate. So we can do it based solely on a percentage basis that is more than fair. Yes. And then I'll say, great, if you don't have any money, which is fine, how much time have you devoted to it?
Yes.
And often the answer is zero. And I'm not being a dick about it. I'm just saying the reality is that like
it's easy to throw stones from glass houses.
It really is. And by the way, we're not going to do everything right, as I just said. But this is our thread. We need 1,000. We need 1,000,000 threads that are doing what we're doing things that are crazier than we're doing. They're doing things more conservative that we're doing. We need an entire tapestry of this. We are not the solution. We are one small thread. But if you don't like what we're doing, get off the fucking couch and go do something else. Yeah.
And I think we sort of talk about conservation in this funny way, is that we say, well, this is how much I spent on conservation, right? Oh,
it's the weirdest business model of all time.
Yeah, we measure success by inputs. Well, I think what Colossal's doing, and what I'd love to see everybody do, is we want to measure by outcomes. What was the outcome of your work? How did you impact it? How many species were saved? And
how many more elephants are there? Right? I always, sometimes this creeps people out. I said this on Joe Rogan. I got a lot of weird feedback about it. It was like we have not solved this yet, but we do have a 17-person team working on artificial wombs. Eventually,
artificial wombs.
This will get Paul with the productionizing idea, but it's talking about scaling.
It's honest. I'm not saying everyone's going to do it, but it's like if you could grow species fully ex-utero in a system so you have no animal welfare issues, and you can engineer in genetic diversity like we could, and you could make 50 founder lines of northern white rhinos, and then work with people conserving land like Paul, and work with Save the Rhinos and biorescue and all of these teams to put them back in the wild, right? Yes, you are going to have, to Paul's point, you're going to have Gen 1 problems around elephant or rhino socialization, right? And so one of the things that we also don't get credit for is like we work with elephant havens in Botswana who saves orphaned elephants and works to synthetically engineer herds and figure out the social dynamics to put orphaned elephants back into herds, right?
Right.
Including baby elephants that don't have a mom, right? And so we are funding that research now because it helps elephants today, but that will also, lessons learned from that will teach us how we do. So we're not, once again, we're not just in a lab. A lot of people think, oh, it's just crazy people in a lab, right? But like we're working with the top people in the field in elephant conservation. We have a project going on in Kenya that's all focused on herd dynamics, migratory patterns, and using drones to identify specific social cues on a specific elephant so we can understand, are they stressed or whatnot. All of that helps elephant conservation today. Like we have an AI team that's just working on that. They're not doing anything with the genetic side of our business. And I think that's super important because that also then gives us data so that when we do have mammoths, not today, but tomorrow when we do have them at some point, we will have lessons learned from elephants so that some of Paul's very valid points we hopefully have solved.
Well, what about the evolutionary aspect in the sense that you could, let's say you got it perfect, right? Let's go hypothetical world and you actually borderline, I know you say you don't do this to be clear, but you borderline like cloned a mammoth.
Yeah.
Let's go with that. You still, actually, no, let's go, you cloned an elk and pretend that's extinct because it's going to be easier for me to make this example. If an elk were extinct and you were able to clone it and actually get it back, elks are fucking 11 feet tall or whatever, and then, they have this 30-foot horizontal leap that they've developed over millions of years because they're running from packs of wolves. And now you develop a clone of like this extinct elk or whatever, and it wasn't trained and hardened by Darwinism, by that environment to be able to run from wolves and jump that far. Even if it's built the same, the muscles look the same, the tone looks the same, it's not the evolutionary animal.
So I'll let Matt talk about animal behavior, but we are seeing that there's a lot of things from a genetic disposition perspective that's built in, okay? Which is pretty interesting, right? So like there are certain trained behaviors that are learned, as you're pointing out, and Matt will comment on. But then there's other things that are just, that this, not to go back to the life finds a way perspective, but there are things that are genetically, if you are a carnivore and you are genetically a carnivore, you want to eat meat. Like our carnivorous marsupials want to eat, meat, right? That is their thing. They're not gonna like be alive and say, why should I eat the grass? Like they don't get confused, right? Like there is genetic programming in what we're building, right? In all of us, right? They're even saying that there's crazy amounts of genetic stress that can be passed down generations that we're now learning, that we in the world of epigenetics are learning about.
Well, and so if you brought back this hypothetical elk, right? It's not as if Colossal tomorrow is going to throw it in the wild and say Godspeed, right? There is this sort of very stage-gated process where you start in small, highly managed situations, understand the effects of the cloning, the editing, whatever it is, and you begin to put them in larger, more semi-wild and truly wild places and observe and see what they're doing. My guess is, to Ben's point, there's a lot of intrinsic behavior and ability that's built into DNA. Is the nature versus nurture thing still plays a role. And so if you don't have the nurture aspect that teaches, this elk how to jump, or a tiger how to hunt in Paul's example, there are ways that you can overcome.
People don't train their house cats to kill mice.
But they know how to do it.
You see, but a house cat sees a mouse, it'll go crazy. Yeah.
But you can work, and there are large carnivore rewilding efforts like the red wolf effort. Like there are big cat orphanages that release cats back to the wild, and so there are tactics that you can use in a management setting. But also, if you're doing it correctly, you're putting this animal in a habitat that has all of the same environmental pressures and that are driving those behaviors. So if you give them the programming, you give them the right motivation and pressures and a little bit of training, you can definitely get there. Yeah. Paul's point's still not wrong. Grandma's dead. She's not coming back. You're not going to be able to make her the exact same person. But we can create functional replacements in ecosystems that perform specific functions that help boost biodiversity and carbon sequestration in an ecosystem in a meaningful way.
Got it. Emily, real quick, can I ask one more question? Yeah. We don't have to if you got the hook. Okay, cool. Yeah. There's a million questions I have for you guys.
Well, this has been awesome. But these conversations are important, so we would love to continue the dialogue.
And before 100%. You ask the question, I would say, tons of respect for Paul. I love the podcast that you guys have done together.
Thank you.
I love listening to Paul and his work, and just because I'm a fan of his, I'll challenge him and say, if there are things of conservation in the conservation space that Colossal should learn, I will fly down there and see his work firsthand. I would love to learn from him, and I'd love to share with him what we're doing at Colossal.
That would be awesome, and I really actually
I won't be as smart, but I want to go.
I hope you do that, because it was a life-altering experience for me, because it brought it home. Like, I'm just some asshole in Jersey with a podcast, right? And this guy's coming here and spilling his guts about all the shit that he was screaming about for years that no one would fucking listen to. And it started this spark that then, now he's like a celebrity, which he would hate if I said that. But it's true, because he's like, his work's amazing. But I always knew Paul was legit as fuck. And then I went down there and I watched him live 150 yards into the, deeper into the jungle with no running water. And how when we fuck, we put a sock on the door? He has to put a 15-foot long industrial towel across a fucking deck.
Yeah,
because he lives on a hardwood surface, and the dude is 100% about that life, and it's the coolest thing. Yeah. Like he
lives it. He lives it. Well, it's authentic, right? It's like you can have, once again, the armchair critics, but when people that live it and they really put their money and time and effort and their even in their physical harm potential in, they're putting their money where their mouth is.
100%.
He lives it.
But the last question we'll get to today, and we can continue the dialogue hopefully in the future. This has been really awesome today, guys. I appreciate you doing this. But the rewilding aspect, what's the earliest thoughts on that? I know there's probably going to be a lot of changes because you're taking everything as it comes, but maybe start with the direwolves as an example today. What would be the plan there, and how would that go down?
Oh, we're lucky that we have this amazing setting for these direwolves to live in. The plan is that these direwolves are going to stay right there. They're going to stay on this 2,000-acre expansive ecological preserve that they live in. We're not planning on putting these animals out into the wild and having any sort of competition with gray wolves. However, we've got amazing rewilding plans for the other species that we're working on with mammoth, dodo, and thylacine.
What would that look like?
So it really starts today. People go, well, if mammoth's not here for 5 years, if dodo's not here for 5 years.
Can we pull up can you go to one more page just as you talk about this? Can you go to colossal.com/Tasmania?
And we have to do a lot of work today. So what Ben's going to show you, it shows some of the social responsibility that we have to do, how we have to engage with stakeholders. We also need to go repair ecosystems. There were pressures that existed in these places that were drivers of extinction. We have to help address those today. That's what's really cool about Colossal is it is this engine that is supporting all this other conventional conservation work, removing invasive species, restoring habitat, ensuring that there's good coexistence measures for people and wildlife. So we're doing that right now on habitats where we think the dodo could return to, where we think the thylacine could return to, where the mammoth could go.
And if we just scroll down, we don't have to like read the page, but if we just scroll down through it while I'm talking, so we have a huge thylacine advisory committee. If you just keep scrolling down, you'll get to them.
This is that Tasmanian tiger.
Tasmanian tiger, yeah. And so just go a little bit further. So we basically, we went and partnered with people from, indigenous representation, local ecologists, local conservationists, as I mentioned, meet people from the Aboriginal community, people like Mayor Draculis, where the last thylacine was actually seen at least observed in the wild. We even had people in there from tourism and brand Tasmania because they care about like if you do something here, what it is. We even had people in there from the logging commission, and people were like, "That's weird." But the largest industry in Tasmania from an economic driver perspective is logging. So once again, if you think that you're going to go do something that applies to the forest without including them and being inclusive, you're just crazy. You're just naive. And so, we don't have thylacines. We're not going to have thylacines for a while, but we want to rewild the thylacines. So we meet with this group every single quarter. I think it's next week. This entire group's at our Melbourne lab doing
in person.
Yeah, in person. So coming over from Tasmania to Melbourne, Australia on this. But I think this is important. And then if you scroll to the very, very bottom, you'll even see that we have like input forms of like, please tell us like what we're doing wrong. What feedback do you want to be? Who do you represent? Do you want to be involved in this council, right? And the council started off with 2 people. Now it's over 30 people. And we meet every single quarter, just giving them the update, hearing their concerns, getting them excited. One of the things they said, if we could plug our YouTube channel, on our YouTube channel,
link in description.
Yeah, and so on our YouTube channel, you'll actually see that we've actually have like they asked us, the feedback that we got from the local government was, could you create a child something that a kid would like to watch and that parents could teach them about the thylacine. And so on our page, if you scroll down, I'm not sure where it is though, we have a whole Tasmanian tiger. Go a little bit further. A lot of videos. Oh yeah. So we have a whole series that we've been creating. We don't raise money. We don't pay. We don't ask for money for this. We're not giving government subsidies for this. We're not taking anything away from Tasmania about this. We're literally creating content that's actually cool and interesting. Maybe fun for you guys to watch in your own time. But that literally is just that now is getting into the Tasmanian ecosystem, teaching people about what the Tasmanian tiger was, how did it affect the ecosystem. How are we using genetics for this, right? And so that's kids' education that we're doing for free. And so, but we didn't come up with that idea. The committee said, hey, we really think that we want parents to be able to talk to their kids about this and get their future. Because it's the kids that we're going to affect. It's not us. It's like future generations are what will be the most impactful for this. And so that's just like an example to Matt's point. We've been, even though we don't have thylacines, we've been working for years with a committee that meets every single quarter. If we only had to just sit in the lab and put blinders on and make animals and with middle fingers up to the air, that'd be a lot easier. But for us, we're sitting here trying to like really do community engagement and listen to critics like Paul and others, learn from them.
And I appreciate you doing that.
But we do. We want to do it. Like I said, we're not gonna do everything right. We haven't done everything right. The New Yorker fucked us. And
Fuck the New Yorker.
And so they broke embargo. So
yeah, I
very frustrating.
All right, guys. Well, I have a million other questions. Like
I love
said,
that we just ended on "fuck the New Yorker."
Yeah, it seems apropos.
Wait till you see my shirt.
But this is, I really appreciate the transparency in what you're doing and going through this. We'll obviously have to continue the conversation at another point, but the work is really fucking amazing, and I hope it's all used for the intentions that you're looking to actually use it.
And we love to get connected. You have a great relationship directly with Paul, so we love to get
I can
offline.
Do that.
That'd be great.
I can do that for
yeah,
sure.
we'll continue this conversation. Maybe one day we could sit down with Paul here.
That would be very cool.
That'd be cool. Yeah. And you guys should come see the lab.
I would love to do that.
So, if you guys ever leave Jersey, come down to
I
Texas.
make it out sometimes. It takes a while, but I'll get down there.
Awesome.
But thank you for the invite, and we'll have the links down below so everyone can check this out.
Thanks a lot.
Everybody else, you know what it is. Give it a thought. Get back to me. Peace. Thank you guys for watching the episode. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and smash that like button on the video. They're both a huge, huge help. And if you would like to follow me on Instagram and X, those links are in my description below.